The bells of St. Albans Cathedral rang with all the confidence of a marriage destined to be remembered. Lady Eleanor Ashcombe wished they would stop. Each peal echoed through the vaulted ceiling like another reminder that the entire county had gathered to witness a union that had never truly belonged to her. The guests smiled. The musicians played. Servants hurried between polished pews carrying bouquets of white roses. Outside, dozens of curious townspeople crowded behind the iron gates, hoping for a glimpse of the Duke's new bride. No one looked at Eleanor. Not really. They looked through her. To most of the people assembled inside the cathedral, she was not the woman Theodore Ashford, Duke of Ravensshire, had chosen. She was merely the woman he had accepted. There was a difference. A painful one. 3 months earlier, the Duke's engagement to Lady Charlotte Beaumont, the daughter of one of England's wealthiest families, had collapsed after an ugly financial dispute between their fathers. The newspapers had called it unfortunate. Society had called it embarrassing. The Duke's counselors had called it dangerous. A Duke nearing 30, without a Duchess, invited gossip. Gossip weakened influence. Influence cost fortunes. Someone had to replace Lady Charlotte. That someone had become Eleanor. Her guardian had accepted the proposal before asking whether she wished to marry a man she had never met. The answer had never mattered, because Eleanor possessed something far more valuable than an opinion. She possessed an old family name, and desperate guardians often traded old names for new money. She had signed the marriage articles without protest, not because she loved the Duke, not because she desired a title, but because the settlement included something her late father had fought his entire life to protect. Ashcombe House, the orphan school attached to the estate. Nearly 80 children depended upon it. Without the marriage settlement, her guardian intended to sell the property within the month. She had agreed to become a duchess, to save children who would never know her sacrifice. She considered it a fair exchange. Until today. Until now. The enormous cathedral doors opened. Every head turned. The musicians stopped. The whispers began immediately. The Duke has arrived. Eleanor lifted her eyes. Theodore Ashford entered exactly as portraits had always depicted him. Tall. Impossibly composed. Dressed in midnight blue formal coat embroidered with silver thread. Dark hair perfectly arranged. A face carved from discipline rather than kindness. He looked every inch the powerful Duke England admired. Then Eleanor noticed the woman holding his arm. Scarlet velvet. Diamond necklace. Confident smile. Lady Charlotte Beaumont. His former fiancée. No, not merely beside him. She walked with the ease of someone who believed she belonged there. Together they advanced down the aisle. Slowly. Gracefully. As though Eleanor did not already occupy the altar waiting for him. A murmur rippled through the cathedral. Several ladies exchanged horrified glances behind jeweled fans. Older gentlemen frowned. Even the bishop hesitated. Charlotte smiled sweetly at Eleanor as she approached. "Oh," she said softly enough that only Eleanor could hear. "I do hope you weren't nervous." Eleanor answered nothing. Charlotte continued. "I promised Theodore I would stand beside him today." A pause. "Someone ought to." Her smile widened. "You understand." The words struck harder than a slap. Eleanor's fingers tightened around her bouquet until tiny white petals scattered across the marble floor. The Duke finally reached the altar. He acknowledged neither insult nor discomfort. Instead he spoke calmly. "Lady Eleanor." She inclined her head. "Your Grace." Nothing more. The bishop cleared his throat uncertainly. "Your Grace." Charlotte remained beside Theodore. She made no effort to move. The silence stretched. The bishop looked increasingly uncomfortable. "My lord." Theodore answered without emotion. "Lady Charlotte will remain." A sharp intake of breath swept through the congregation. Someone dropped a prayer book. Even the choir exchanged stunned glances. Eleanor stared at Theodore. For one impossible moment, she wondered whether this was some strange aristocratic custom unknown to her. Then she saw Charlotte's expression. Triumph. This had been planned. Every step. Every humiliation. The Duke had knowingly allowed another woman to stand beside him at his own wedding. Not because he loved Charlotte, because he wanted everyone present to understand one thing. The bride standing opposite him meant nothing. Her cheeks warmed. Not with embarrassment. With clarity. She suddenly understood exactly what this marriage would become. Not a partnership. Not companionship. A transaction. She slowly lowered her bouquet. Then, without haste, she reached up. The pale blue embroidered veil resting upon her hair had belonged to her mother. It was the only piece of her mother's wedding attire that remained after years of financial ruin. Very carefully, she removed it. The pins slipped free one by one. Soft auburn hair tumbled over her shoulders. The entire cathedral watched in silence. Charlotte's confident smile faltered. Eleanor folded the veil neatly. She looked directly at Theodore. Her voice was quiet, perfectly steady. If Lady Charlotte is to stand where a bride should stand. She placed the folded veil into Charlotte's hands. Then perhaps she should wear what belongs there. Silence. Absolute silence. Charlotte stared down at the veil. Theodore did not move. Neither did anyone else. Eleanor stepped backward. One measured step. Then another. Without tears. Without accusation. Without pleading. She turned away from the altar. Her heels echoed across the marble floor. No one dared stop her. Behind her, for the first time in many years, the Duke of Ravensshire forgot how to breathe. The cathedral doors closed behind Eleanor with a heavy sound that echoed through the square. It was not loud, yet it felt like the ending of one life and the uncertain beginning of another. The morning air was cold enough to sting her cheeks. Rain drifted from low gray clouds, settling gently upon the blue embroidery of the wedding veil folded in her arms. She paused only once, not to look back, never to look back. Instead, she inhaled slowly, forcing herself to remain upright. A lady who had already surrendered her dignity should not surrender her composure as well. Behind the cathedral gates, murmurs spread through the gathering crowd. They say the bride left. Did the Duke refuse her? No. I heard another woman stood beside him. What a scandal. The poor girl. Eleanor ignored every word. Pity had never repaired a broken future. She crossed the square with measured steps, though each movement made the satin slippers beneath her gown heavier with rainwater. Her guardian's carriage should have been waiting. It was gone. She almost smiled. Of course it was. Sir Malcolm Ashcombe had always invested only in opportunities that promised profit. The instant she ceased to be profitable, she ceased to exist. He had abandoned her before she reached the cathedral doors. The realization hurt less than she expected, perhaps because she had expected it all along. She adjusted the shawl around her shoulders and began walking toward the Western District. It was nearly 4 miles. Under ordinary circumstances, such a journey would have been impossible for a lady dressed as a bride. Today, nothing about her circumstances was ordinary. Across the city, inside St. Albans Cathedral, no one moved. The bishop remained frozen before the altar. Charlotte Beaumont still held the folded blue veil in her perfectly manicured hands. She stared at it as though it might suddenly burst into flames. Theodore Ashford had not spoken for nearly a minute. His steward, Mr. Pembroke, quietly approached. Your Grace. Silence. Your Grace. Theodore finally looked toward the cathedral doors. Where is Lady Eleanor? Pembroke hesitated. She has left, Your Grace. I can see that. Another silence. Why did no one stop her? The question startled everyone nearby, including Charlotte. She laughed lightly. My dear Theodore, surely that was exactly what she intended. No answer. Charlotte slipped her arm toward us once more. We can simply announce that the ceremony has been postponed. Still, nothing. Theodore continued staring toward the empty doorway. Something about Eleanor's final words lingered in his thoughts. Then perhaps she should wear what belongs there. There had been no tears, no hysterics, no pleading, only disappointment. Strange. He had expected outrage. Instead, she had looked almost sorry for him. Nearly an hour later, Eleanor reached the outskirts of Ravensshire estate. Most people assumed the Ashcombe family fortune had disappeared decades earlier. They were only partly correct. The manor itself remained, though faded, though weathered, though increasingly surrounded by fields that had already been sold to neighboring landowners. Beyond the manor stood the true heart of the estate, Ashcombe Home. Nearly 80 orphan children lived there, children whose parents had perished during war, illness, or crushing poverty. The school had been founded by Eleanor's mother 20 years earlier. It had never made money. That was precisely why Sir Malcolm hated it. He considered compassion an expensive hobby. As Eleanor approached the front gate, the youngest children spotted her first. Miss Eleanor. Tiny footsteps thundered across the garden. 6-year-old Lucy reached her before anyone else. Without hesitation, the little girl wrapped both arms around Eleanor's waist. "You look beautiful." Eleanor laughed softly. "The dress seems rather overdressed for gardening." Lucy frowned. "Did you get married?" The question lingered between them. Children possessed a remarkable talent for asking the questions adults feared. Eleanor knelt until their eyes met. "No." "Will you another day?" "I don't know." Lucy accepted the answer, without concern. Children often accepted uncertainty better than grown people. She simply smiled. "I'm glad you're home." Those 4 words nearly shattered Eleanor's carefully maintained composure. Home. How long had it been since anyone had used that word without expecting something in return? Inside the manor, Mrs. Whitcomb, the elderly headmistress, hurried into the entrance hall. Her expression changed immediately. My heavens! She embraced Eleanor without asking permission. No questions. No curiosity. Only kindness. When they finally separated, Mrs. Whitcomb studied the untouched bouquet still resting in Eleanor's hand. "It did not happen." "No." "I'm sorry. So am I." Another pause. Mrs. Whitcomb sighed heavily. "There is something you should know." The warmth disappeared from Eleanor's face. "What is it?" "The solicitor came yesterday." Her heart sank. "He brought new documents." Mrs. Whitcomb led her into the old study where several papers lay neatly arranged across the desk. "The estate has accumulated more debt than we believed." Eleanor unfolded the first letter. Each sentence tightened the knot already forming inside her chest. Unless the outstanding balance was paid within 30 days, Ashcombe House, including the orphan school, would legally pass into the hands of Sir Malcolm. He intended to demolish the school. The children would be dispersed among overcrowded parish institutions across England. Lucy, Thomas, Emily, little James, who still cried whenever thunderstorms arrived. Every child would lose the only home they had ever known. Eleanor closed her eyes. This was why she had agreed to marry. Not for a title, not for wealth, not even for herself. She had traded her future for theirs. And now, she had lost both. Mrs. Whitcomb placed a gentle hand over hers. "We shall think of something." Eleanor looked toward the rain-streaked windows. Outside, the children continued playing in the garden, blissfully unaware that their home stood only weeks away from disappearing forever. "I made them a promise." "You have never broken one." "No." Her voice became almost a whisper. "But today I may have." At that same moment, miles away, the Duke of Ravensshire stood alone inside his private study. The wedding guests had departed. Charlotte had finally returned to her family's carriage after discovering that Theodore barely heard a single word she said. The vast room felt unusually silent. Mr. Pembroke entered carrying a leather dispatch folder. "There is one matter requiring your signature, Your Grace." Theodore accepted the papers absent-mindedly. As he opened the folder, a single folded document slipped onto the desk. Its title caught his attention. Lady Eleanor Ashcombe. He frowned. "I don't remember requesting her file." "You did not." Pembroke adjusted his spectacles. "It was prepared during the marriage negotiations." Theodore unfolded the first page, then the second. His expression slowly changed. "No dowry." "No, Your Grace." "No investments." "None." "No inherited fortune?" "Very little." He continued reading. Then, his eyes stopped on a single paragraph. For several long seconds, he did not move. Finally, he looked up. "What is Ashcombe Home?" Pembroke blinked. "You do not know?" "Answer the question." The steward swallowed. It is an orphan school, Your Grace. Another silence. It houses 78 children. Theodore looked back down. One sentence had been underlined by the estate solicitor months earlier. Lady Eleanor accepted the marriage only after negotiating legal protection for the orphan school before requesting any provision for herself. Nothing. Not jewelry. Not income. Not property. Only the children. For the first time that day, the Duke realized he had never asked a single question about the woman he had intended to marry. And for the first time, he wondered who Lady Eleanor Ashcombe truly was. The answer, he feared, had walked out of the cathedral before he had ever bothered to discover it. The following morning, London awoke hungry for scandal. By breakfast, every gentleman's club repeated a different version of what had happened inside St. Albans Cathedral. Some claimed the bride had fled in tears. Others insisted she had slapped the Duke before leaving. One particularly imaginative newspaper suggested Lady Eleanor had discovered she loved another man. Not one report contained the truth. The truth had been far quieter, and therefore far more dangerous. Theodore Ashford ignored every newspaper placed before him. Instead, he stared at the file lying open across his breakfast table. Lady Eleanor Ashcombe. Age, 24. Education, French, Latin, music, estate accounting. Languages, 3. Dowry, negligible. Personal debts, none. Charitable responsibilities. His eyes stopped once again. Ashcombe home. 78 orphan children. Personally managed by Lady Eleanor for nearly 6 years. He turned another page. Every financial record showed the same pattern. Whenever money entered her accounts, it disappeared into the orphanage. Winter coal, medicine, teachers, food, shoes, books, repairs. Never dresses. Never jewels. Never luxury. Even her modest wedding gown had been altered from one her late mother had worn. Theodore slowly closed the file. Something did not fit. A woman capable of negotiating such careful financial protections should never have accepted public humiliation so quietly. Unless she believed something else mattered more than her own pride. He stood. Prepare my carriage. Mr. Pembroke looked surprised. To where, Your Grace? The Duke folded Eleanor's file beneath his arm. Ashcombe House. Nearly 2 hours later, the Black Raven's hire carriage rolled through ancient oak gates. Theodore expected decay. He expected servants waiting desperately for rescue. He expected neglected children. Instead, he found laughter. Dozens of children chased one another beneath flowering apple trees. A little boy balanced on a homemade wooden horse. 2 girls practiced reading aloud beneath an old oak. Another group worked together planting vegetables beside the kitchen garden. The buildings were old, very old, but spotless. Everything was repaired. Everything was loved. The carriage stopped. Theodore stepped down. The children immediately froze. One tiny boy tugged another's sleeve. Is that a king? No. He looks too grumpy. Another child whispered. I think he's a duke. Theodore almost smiled. Almost. Mrs. Wickham appeared from the front steps. Her expression revealed neither fear nor admiration, only cautious politeness. Your Grace. Mrs. Wickham. She bowed briefly. I was not expecting visitors. I should like to speak with Lady Eleanor. I'm afraid she is occupied. I can wait. Mrs. Wickham hesitated, then quietly nodded. This way. Instead of leading him into the manor, she brought him toward the old stable. The Duke frowned. This is hardly the drawing room. No. Mrs. Wickham smiled faintly. It is where Lady Eleanor spends most mornings. The stable doors stood open. Inside, Theodore stopped walking. There was Eleanor. Not in silks. Not wearing pearls. She had exchanged yesterday's wedding gown for a simple blue working dress. Her sleeves were rolled above her wrists. Strands of auburn hair escaped from a loose braid. She knelt beside an old carpenter's table surrounded by 6 children. One little girl held a broken wooden doll. Another clutched scattered pieces of a toy cart. A young boy balanced a cracked violin. Eleanor patiently repaired each item one by one. She laughed as the children argued over whose toy should be fixed first. Not politely. not delicately. She laughed with genuine delight. The Duke had never imagined she could. She looked entirely different.
Alive.
A little boy suddenly spotted him. Miss Eleanor. Everyone turned. The room became silent. Eleanor slowly stood. Their eyes met. She looked neither embarrassed nor pleased. Only surprised. Your Grace. He inclined his head. Lady Eleanor. The children looked from one adult to the other with growing confusion. Lucy stepped closer to Eleanor. Is he the man you were going to marry? The room became painfully quiet. Children possessed an unfortunate habit of asking impossible questions. Eleanor gently rested a hand upon Lucy's shoulder. Yes. Lucy looked at Theodore for several long seconds, then asked, Why didn't you? Theodore found himself completely unprepared. Kings answered ministers. Generals answered parliament. Dukes answered no one. Yet before one little orphan, he had no answer at all. Finally, I made a mistake. Lucy accepted this with remarkable seriousness. My papa used to say mistakes should be fixed. Then she returned to her doll, as though she had solved the matter entirely. Several older children nodded in agreement. Theodore stood speechless. Eleanor quietly dismissed the children. Run along. Within moments, only the two of them remained inside the stable. You've come to apologize? Her voice remained calm. I've come to understand. She regarded him for a moment. That may prove more difficult. I've been told you accepted the marriage only to save this place. I did. You never intended to benefit personally.
No.
He struggled to understand. You were willing to spend your life married to a stranger. If it meant these children could remain together. She glanced toward the garden where laughter echoed through the open doors. Yes. The simplicity of her answer unsettled him. You sacrificed everything. I made a choice. There is a difference. She smiled sadly. There usually isn't. A sharp cry suddenly echoed from outside. Eleanor. Both turned. One of the stable boys came sprinting toward them. His face had gone white. They've come. Who? Sir Malcolm. Eleanor's expression changed instantly. How many? 6 men. They're taking inventory. Without another word, she hurried toward the front of the estate. Theodore followed. As they rounded the corner, they found 6 well-dressed surveyors hammering wooden stakes into the front lawn. Sir Malcolm Ashcombe stood directing them with a polished cane. He smiled broadly upon seeing Eleanor. My dear ward. She stopped several yards away. What are you doing? Preparing. For what? The auction. Children began gathering behind Eleanor. Watching. Listening. Confused. Sir Malcolm unfolded a legal document. The buyers wished to inspect the grounds. Mrs. Wickham gasped. The sale hasn't been approved. It will be. He smiled. Very soon. Eleanor stepped forward. You promised to wait. I changed my mind. You gave your word. My dear. His smile widened. I've never found promises particularly profitable. Several children clung to Eleanor's skirt. Lucy whispered, Are they taking her home? Eleanor could not answer. Sir Malcolm noticed Theodore standing behind her. His expression brightened immediately. Your Grace. He hurried forward. I had no idea you were here. Theodore remained perfectly still. Sir Malcolm continued smiling. I trust you've come to settle this unfortunate misunderstanding. Instead, the Duke asked one quiet question. You intend to sell an orphanage? Sir Malcolm laughed lightly. Business is rarely sentimental. Theodore's gaze shifted toward the frightened children gathered behind Eleanor, then back to Sir Malcolm. Something cold settled into his expression. For the first time since arriving, he truly understood what Eleanor had been protecting. And for the first time, Sir Malcolm began to realize he might have chosen the wrong enemy. The wind carried away the last echo of Sir Malcolm's laughter. For a long moment no one moved. The surveyors looked uncertain. The children clung tightly to one another. Even the horses pulling the Duke's carriage stamped uneasily against the gravel. Sir Malcolm finally broke the silence. Well, his smile returned. Surely your Grace understands that sentiment cannot interfere with business. Theodore regarded him without expression. I understand many things. Excellent. Sir Malcolm spread his hands confidently. Then you appreciate why this property must be liquidated.
No.
The single word landed like a hammer. Sir Malcolm blinked. I beg your pardon? I said no. The Duke's voice remained calm. But perhaps you did not hear me over the sound of your own greed. Every surveyor lowered his eyes. Mrs. Wickham quietly inhaled. Eleanor stared at Theodore. She had expected indifference. She had expected polite distance. She had not expected this. Sir Malcolm's smile slowly disappeared. You forget yourself, Your Grace. I rarely do. The Duke stepped forward until only a few feet separated them. I asked whether you intended to sell an orphanage. I do. I hope there might be some explanation. There is. Sir Malcolm shrugged. It is valuable land. Theodore nodded once. I see. He turned toward the surveyors. You gentlemen may leave. None of them moved. They looked nervously toward Sir Malcolm. The Duke spoke again, this time without raising his voice. I do not repeat lawful instructions. One by one, the surveyors quietly removed the wooden stakes they had planted. Within minutes, their wagons rolled back through the gates. Sir Malcolm's face reddened. You have no authority here. Theodore met his gaze. I possess sufficient authority. You are interfering in private affairs. I am preventing public disgrace. Sir Malcolm leaned closer. You know nothing about this family.
No.
The Duke answered evenly. But I know enough about yours. The children watched in astonishment. Little Thomas tugged on Eleanor's sleeve. Is the scary man losing? Eleanor almost smiled. I don't know. I think he is. Lucy nodded confidently. The tall man has the louder, quiet voice. Even Theodore heard the remark. For the briefest moment, the corner of his mouth almost lifted. Sir Malcolm gathered his gloves with sharp, irritated movements. This conversation is not finished. No, the Duke replied. It has only begun. You may regret involving yourself. I rarely regret doing what is right. Sir Malcolm gave Eleanor one final cold glance. You've always mistaken kindness for strength. Then he climbed into his carriage. Before the door closed, he looked directly at Theodore. There are matters about Lady Eleanor you have yet to discover. The carriage rolled away. Its wheels disappeared beneath the ancient oak trees. Only then did Eleanor finally exhale. Mrs. Wickham ushered the children back toward the school. Within minutes the gardens grew peaceful again. Only Eleanor and Theodore remained standing beneath the fading afternoon light. She folded her hands before her. You should not have done that. His brow lifted slightly. Protected your home? You have made him dangerous. He already was. You've embarrassed him publicly. I noticed. He never forgives humiliation. Theodore's expression barely changed. Neither do I. Their eyes met. For the first time, neither looked away. Mrs. Wickham returned carrying a small tray. You've both forgotten luncheon. I've no appetite, Eleanor replied. The elderly woman ignored her completely. She placed fresh bread, cheese, and warm soup upon a weathered garden table. The children insist. Almost immediately, several little faces peeked from nearby windows. Watching. Waiting. One tiny girl whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. If the Duke doesn't eat Miss Eleanor's soup, she'll think he doesn't like her cooking. Another child corrected her. She didn't cook it, but she stirred it. Apparently, that was sufficient. Theodore looked toward the watching children, then quietly removed his gloves. He sat. Eleanor hesitated before joining him. The children immediately erupted into silent celebration behind the curtains. Mrs. Wickham hid a smile. For several minutes, neither adult spoke. The soup was simple. Vegetables, fresh herbs, homemade bread. Nothing served at Raven's higher house resembled it. Nothing tasted quite like it either. Finally, Theodore asked, Do you eat with them every day? When I'm here. And when you aren't. They wait. The answer surprised him. They refuse to begin until I return. Why? Eleanor looked toward the school windows. They've already lost enough people. The Duke slowly set down his spoon. He remembered something from her file. Lady Eleanor personally names every child upon arrival. He had dismissed the sentence when he first read it.
Now.
He understood. That evening, back at Raven's higher house, the Duke entered his library carrying Eleanor's file beneath one arm. Mr. Pembroke was waiting. You have correspondence, Your Grace. Theodore barely glanced at the stack, until one envelope caught his attention. The Beaumont crest. He opened it. Inside lay a single invitation. Dinner tomorrow evening. Lady Charlotte Beaumont requests the pleasure of Your Grace's company. Beneath the elegant handwriting another sentence had been added. I possess information concerning Lady Eleanor Ashcombe, which you deserve to know before making any further decisions. Theodore read the line twice, then folded the letter. What do we know of Lady Charlotte's recent activities? Pembroke hesitated. Very little. I dislike knowing very little. I shall investigate. Quietly. Across the city, inside Beaumont Manor, Lady Charlotte stood beside a marble fireplace wearing emerald silk. A maid entered. The invitation has been delivered. Charlotte smiled. Excellent. She walked toward a polished writing desk where another letter already waited. This one bore no family crest, only a black wax seal. She opened it carefully.
Inside. 3 lines.
The Duke visited Ashcombe House today. He has begun asking questions. Stop him before he learns about the ledger. Charlotte's confident smile disappeared. Very slowly, she burned the note over a candle. The ashes drifted into the fire. The ledger. She whispered. So, he doesn't know. Not yet. But if Theodore ever discovered the truth hidden inside that missing ledger, everything would change. Not only for Eleanor, for Charlotte herself, and, perhaps, for the Raven's higher family. Meanwhile, several miles away, Eleanor sat alone in her father's abandoned study. A single candle burned beside stacks of aging account books. She unlocked the bottom drawer of an old oak desk. Inside rested a small leather-bound ledger tied with faded blue ribbon. Her father's handwriting filled every page. She gently touched the cover. I wish you had told me what it meant. The candle flickered. A loose folded letter slipped from between the pages. She had never noticed it before. Across the front, in elegant handwriting, were 6 words. To Theodore Ashford, if necessary. Eleanor stared at the name. The Duke's name, written by her father. Nearly 15 years before either of them had ever met. The blood slowly drained from her face. What? She carefully unfolded the letter. Before she could read the first line, a sudden gust of wind burst through the open window. The candle went out. Darkness swallowed the room. And somewhere beyond the manor, a horse galloped toward Ashcombe House. Someone else was coming for the ledger. The candle died. Darkness swallowed the study so completely that Eleanor could no longer see her own hands. Only the rain tapping against the window reminded her she was not dreaming. She remained perfectly still. Years spent managing frightened children had taught her one lesson above all others. When danger entered a room, silence often became the safest answer. The wind continued drifting through the broken latch. Then, she heard it. A floorboard. Not inside the hallway. Inside the study. Someone else was in the room. Very slowly Eleanor slid her father's ledger beneath her shawl. Her heartbeat became the loudest sound she could hear. Another step. Closer. A man's voice whispered from the darkness. Find the desk. There was another one. 2 intruders. Perhaps 3. They had entered without disturbing the household. That frightened Eleanor more than anything. These were not common thieves. They knew exactly where they were going. A faint lantern glow appeared beneath the study door. The men froze. So she's still awake. Search quickly. One drawer opened. Another. Papers scattered across the floor. Old letters were tossed aside like rubbish. Whoever these men served, they wanted only one thing. The ledger. Outside. Mrs. Whitcomb hurried across the corridor holding a lantern. She had heard the broken window. Eleanor. No answer. She knocked softly. My dear? Still nothing. She reached for the handle. Before she could open it, the study door burst outward. A masked man shoved past her so violently that the lantern flew from her hands. Glass shattered across the hallway. Flames briefly danced over the wooden floor before dying beneath the rain blowing through the open windows. Mrs. Wickham screamed. The manor erupted into chaos. Inside the study, Eleanor darted toward the hidden servants' staircase. Her father had shown it to her when she was only 12. Every old house keeps one secret passage, he had once laughed. You never know when you'll need it. Tonight, she finally did. She slipped through the narrow door just as another masked man reached for her. His fingers caught only empty air. Damn it. She's got something. After her. The narrow staircase twisted downward through the walls of Ashcombe House. The ledger pressed tightly against Eleanor's chest. She had never run through these passages as an adult. The stone steps were uneven. The darkness absolute. Behind her, boots thundered. Closer. Closer still. Outside. A black horse galloped through the estate gates. Theodore Ashford barely waited for the animal to stop before jumping to the ground. He had ridden nearly the entire distance from Ravensshire House after receiving an urgent message from Mrs. Wickham's stable boy. Unknown men at Ashcombe House. He crossed the front lawn in long, determined strides. Smoke drifted from an upstairs window. Servants rushed in every direction. Children cried inside the school. Mr. Pembroke caught up behind him. Your Grace. The children. They're safe. The lady? We don't know. Theodore's expression hardened. For the first time in years, fear reached him before reason. The front door stood open.
Inside.
Furniture had been overturned. Paintings lay shattered across the floor. Mrs. Wickham sat trembling while two maids tended the cut on her forehead. She looked up immediately. They're after the ledger. Theodore knelt beside her. What ledger? Eleanor's father's. What is in it? I don't know. You truly don't? She shook her head. He never trusted anyone with it. A loud crash echoed from somewhere inside the walls. Theodore stood instantly. They're still here.
Meanwhile,
Eleanor emerged from the hidden staircase inside the old chapel attached to the manor. Only a few candles remained burning near the altar. She hurried toward the rear entrance, then stopped. Someone stood there. A tall man dressed entirely in black. His face hidden beneath a hood. He slowly drew a pistol. Lady Eleanor. She instinctively stepped backward. You've made this unnecessarily difficult. She tightened her grip around the ledger. I don't know who you are.
No.
His voice remained calm. But you possess something that belongs elsewhere. It belongs to my father. It belonged to your father. A pause. Now it belongs to us. Before Eleanor could move, another voice thundered through the chapel. It belongs exactly where it is. The masked man turned. Theodore stood beneath the archway. Rain dripped from his riding coat. A heavy walking cane rested in one hand. His eyes had become winter itself. The stranger laughed softly. So, the Duke finally arrives. You know me. I know enough. He raised the pistol. You should have remained in Ravensshire. Theodore took another step. You won't shoot. Why not? Because if I die tonight, the Duke's gaze never wavered. Every magistrate in England will hunt you before sunrise. Silence. The masked man's hand tightened. Then, he smiled beneath the hood. You've inherited your father's confidence. The words struck Theodore unexpectedly. My father? You ask too many questions. With astonishing speed, the stranger hurled a brass candlestick toward the stained glass window. The glass exploded inward. The horses outside panicked. Before Theodore reached the doorway, the man had disappeared into the storm. The chapel fell silent. Only Eleanor's rapid breathing remained. For several seconds, neither she nor Theodore spoke. Finally, he looked at the leather book clutched tightly against her chest. May I see it? She hesitated. This book has already nearly gotten people killed. I know. It may yet. Another silence. Then, very slowly, she handed it to him. Theodore accepted the worn leather volume with surprising gentleness. It looked ordinary. Cracked spine, worn corners, faded initials. Nothing suggested that armed men would invade a country estate searching for it. He opened the first page. Every line contained figures, accounts, payments,
dates,
estate transactions. Nothing remarkable. He frowned. This cannot be why they came. Eleanor reached beside him. My father always wrote in 2 ledgers. What do you mean? She turned several pages, then stopped. There. Theodore looked closer. Each paragraph contained certain letters written slightly darker than the others. Not enough to notice casually. Enough to create another message, hidden between the ordinary accounts. He read silently. His heartbeat slowed, then stopped altogether. If this book has been opened, the Ravensshire family has been betrayed by one of its own. Theodore stared at the page. His own surname.
His own family.
Written 15 years earlier. He slowly turned the next page. Another hidden sentence appeared. Do not trust Beaumont. He looked up sharply. Beaumont. Eleanor's face had gone pale. Charlotte Beaumont. Her family. The woman who had stood beside him at the altar. The warning had been written more than a decade before Charlotte had ever entered his life. Which meant, whatever this conspiracy was, it had begun long before either of them had been born. Far away, inside Beaumont Manor, Lady Charlotte sat alone beside her bedroom fire. A servant entered quietly. My lady. Well, the servant swallowed. The men failed. Charlotte closed her eyes. And the ledger? They never recovered it. For the first time in years, Lady Charlotte Beaumont looked genuinely afraid. She whispered only 4 words. Then he will know. Rain continued to drum softly against the chapel windows. Neither Eleanor nor Theodore spoke. The hidden sentence still rested between them like a ghost. Do not trust Beaumont. The Duke read the words again. Then again. Finally, he closed the ledger. This was written nearly 15 years ago. Eleanor nodded. My father never wrote anything without purpose. You never knew about these hidden messages?
No.
He never mentioned them? She smiled sadly. My father believed children should carry books, not burdens. Theodore looked at the worn leather cover. He failed.
No.
Eleanor gently corrected him. He delayed them. Mrs. Wickham entered quietly. The children are asleep. She noticed the expressions on both faces. What have you found? The Duke hesitated. Questions. She sighed. I feared as much. An hour later, the 3 of them gathered inside the old library at Ashcombe House. Heavy curtains blocked the storm outside. The fire crackled softly. The ledger rested beneath a bright reading lamp. Theodore carefully turned another page. Most contained ordinary estate accounts, payments, taxes, crop yields, livestock purchases, until suddenly, the numbers changed. Instead of financial records, there appeared a list of names, each followed by a date, each date followed by a single symbol,
A crown.
a raven,
Or
a broken seal. What does this mean? Mrs. Wickham leaned closer. I've never seen that page. Eleanor pointed toward one name. My father's. Beside it, a raven. Further down, another name. Edmund Ashford. Theodore's father. Another raven. Then, one final entry. Victoria Ashford. His mother. Instead of a raven, a broken seal. Theodore's expression darkened. My mother died when I was 12. So my father told me. He said it was a riding accident. Mrs. Wickham quietly looked away. Eleanor noticed. You know something. The elderly woman hesitated, then slowly nodded. I promised never to speak. To whom? Your father. The room became silent. He visited here 2 nights before Lady Victoria died. Theodore looked up sharply. My father?
no.
She shook her head. Your mother. The Duke stared at her. My mother came here? Several times. Why? Mrs. Wickham folded her hands tightly. Because she trusted Mr. Ashcombe. Theodore felt something shift beneath years of certainty. My father never mentioned it. He wouldn't.
Why?
Mrs. Wickham's voice became almost a whisper. Because your mother believed someone inside Ravensshire House intended to destroy your family. Silence. Only the fire continued burning. Theodore slowly stood.
No.
Mrs. Wickham met his eyes. I wish I were mistaken. My father loved my mother. I never questioned that. Then who? I don't know. Another painful pause. But Lady Victoria feared someone close. The Duke walked toward the window. Rain blurred the gardens beyond. For 28 years, he believed his mother's death had been an accident.
Now.
Nothing felt certain. Eleanor quietly approached. You don't have to solve this tonight. He laughed softly. There may not be a tonight. She frowned. What do you mean? He turned toward her. Whoever sent those men knows the ledger still exists. They'll return. Yes. And next time, he looked directly into her eyes. They won't come merely to steal it. Across the countryside, a black carriage rolled through the darkness. Inside sat Lady Charlotte Beaumont. Opposite her, an older gentleman dressed in expensive black wool, silver hair, cold blue eyes. Lord Augustus Beaumont, Charlotte's uncle, one of the wealthiest men in England. He folded the morning newspaper neatly. You disappointed me. Charlotte remained calm. The men failed. You chose them. They underestimated the Duke.
No.
He corrected quietly. They underestimated the woman. Charlotte looked toward the rain-streaked window. I never imagined Eleanor Ashcombe would become important. Lord Beaumont smiled. Neither did anyone else. And now, he rested both hands upon his cane. Now she is becoming dangerous. Charlotte lowered her voice. What if Theodore reads everything? He mustn't. And if he does? The old man answered without emotion. Then neither of them can remain alive. Charlotte looked away. Even she had not expected those words. Meanwhile, back at Ashcombe House, Mr. Pembroke arrived shortly before dawn. He carried several leather document cases. I've searched the Raven's higher archives. Theodore accepted them immediately. Anything? Pembroke nodded. Something very strange. He spread several faded maps across the library table. The estate boundaries. Eleanor leaned closer. I don't understand. Pembroke pointed toward a section of woodland separating Ravenhire from Ashcombe lands. This forest belonged to your family. She nodded. Until my grandfather sold it. So, everyone believed. He produced another map. This survey was never registered. Theodore frowned. Why? Because. Pembroke unfolded the final document. It appears the sale never actually happened. Eleanor blinked. What? The signatures were forged. The room fell silent. If these records are genuine, Pembroke continued carefully. Ashcombe House was never legally bankrupt. Mrs. Wickham covered her mouth. Theodore looked from the maps to the ledger, then to Eleanor. Your guardian never owned this estate. Eleanor whispered. He couldn't have sold it.
No.
The Duke answered quietly. Which means every debt, every threat.
His jaw tightened.
Every sacrifice you made was built upon a lie. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Eleanor slowly sat down, not because she felt weak, because the weight of 20 years of deception had suddenly become too heavy to carry standing. The orphanage had never been doomed. Her father had protected it. Someone had erased the truth. Someone powerful. Someone patient. Someone who had spent years ensuring Eleanor believed she had no choice. Far away, inside Sir Malcolm's private study, a servant hurried through the door. My lord. Sir Malcolm looked up. What is it? The Duke has begun searching the old estate records. The color slowly drained from Sir Malcolm's face. And Lady Eleanor? She still has the ledger. He closed his eyes. For the first time, the arrogant guardian looked frightened. Not frightened of Eleanor. Not even of the Duke. He was frightened of the man waiting in London, Lord Augustus Beaumont. Because if the truth emerged, Sir Malcolm knew exactly what happened to men who became liabilities. And he suspected he was about to become one. 3 days later, Ashcombe House stood unusually quiet. The broken windows had been repaired. The frightened children had resumed their lessons. Yet beneath the calm, everyone felt the same uneasy truth. Whoever had searched for the ledger would return. Theodore stood beside the library fireplace. Mr. Pembroke had spent every waking hour comparing old deeds with the Raven's higher archives. The evidence became clearer with every page. The Ashcombe estate had never legally belonged to Sir Malcolm. Every document transferring ownership had been forged. Every debt manufactured. Every threat against Eleanor had rested upon lies that stretched back nearly 20 years. Someone had built an empire upon stolen signatures. Someone powerful enough to deceive judges, solicitors, even Parliament. The Duke closed another file. This cannot remain here. Eleanor looked up. What cannot? You. She frowned. I beg your pardon? The ledger has already drawn armed men to your home. I won't abandon the children. I did not ask you to. He stepped closer. They all come with you. Mrs. Wickham blinked. The children? Every one of them. Theodore looked toward the windows where laughter echoed faintly from the gardens. Ravensshire House has more than 60 unused rooms. Mrs. Wickham stared. The West Wing alone could house every child. It will. Silence filled the room. Eleanor searched his face. You would open Ravensshire House. To orphans? I would open my home. She noticed he had chosen the second word deliberately. Home. Not estate. Not property. Home. For reasons she could not explain. That single word unsettled her more than any grand declaration ever could. 2 days later, the procession arrived at Ravensshire House. 4 large wagons carried books, beds, blankets, musical instruments, small wooden toys, everything the children considered precious. The servants gathered beneath the front steps. Many had worked for the Ashford family for decades. They watched silently as nearly 80 children climbed from the wagons. The housekeeper, Mrs. Sinclair, whispered to the butler. 80. 81. He corrected. The little baby makes 81. Mrs. Sinclair sighed. We've never housed children.
No.
But His Grace never asks impossible things. She looked toward the Duke. I believe this one may be. Lucy became the first child to step through the enormous front doors. She gasped. The entrance hall looked larger than the entire Ashcombe School. Gigantic crystal chandeliers hung from painted ceilings. Marble statues lined the walls. Portraits of Ashford ancestors watched from above. Lucy tugged Eleanor's hand. Do kings live here? Eleanor smiled.
No.
Only one stubborn duke. Lucy nodded seriously. I think kings would get lost. Even Theodore overheard. This time, he actually smiled. Several servants froze. One elderly footman quietly whispered, Did His Grace just smile? Another answered, I've served here 23 years. I believe that was the first. Life inside Ravensshire House changed almost immediately. Children filled hallways once ruled by silence. Footsteps echoed through marble corridors. Laughter drifted into forgotten drawing rooms. The ancient library became crowded with reading lessons. Even the gardens seemed brighter. At first, the servants complained. By the 4th day, they secretly baked extra biscuits. By the 6th, they were teaching little boys how to polish riding boots. By the end of the week, nobody could remember what the mansion had sounded like before children. Not everyone welcomed the change. Late one evening, a maid quietly entered the Duke's private study. She glanced around carefully. Empty. She crossed toward his desk, opened the top drawer, removed a folded sheet of paper, copied several names onto another page, then quietly slipped out again. She never noticed Mr. Pembroke watching from the shadows beyond the corridor. The following morning, the Duke hosted a breakfast meeting with his solicitors. Several respected magistrates attended, along with 2 members of Parliament. The forged documents lay spread across the enormous dining table. One elderly judge adjusted his spectacles. I've examined every signature. And they're false. Another solicitor nodded. Without question. A third quietly added, if this reaches Parliament, it could destroy several noble families. Theodore folded his hands. Good. The room looked up. I've grown tired of protecting guilty men because they possess titles. Later that afternoon, a gold-embossed invitation arrived. The Ravensshire Charity Ball, hosted annually by the Duke himself, cancelled after his mother's death, for 16 consecutive years. Mrs. Sinclair stared at the announcement. You're reviving the ball? Theodore nodded. It is time. Pembroke frowned. The timing is dangerous. Exactly. You believe they'll come. I know they will. That evening, Eleanor found Theodore standing alone inside the grand ballroom. Hundreds of candles had already been lit. Servants polished mirrors. Florists arranged enormous white roses. Musicians rehearsed quietly. The room shimmered with elegance. She approached slowly. I didn't know Ravensshire House could look like this. It hasn't. He looked around. Since my mother died. She noticed sadness crossing his expression. You loved her very much. I remember very little. He admitted quietly. I've spent 16 years trying not to remember it all. Another silence. Then, I'd like you to attend the ball as my guest. She looked surprised. I've scarcely recovered from one public humiliation. This one will be different. She laughed softly. You sound very certain. I'm trying to be. At that exact moment, miles away, Lord Augustus Beaumont sat inside his London townhouse. A servant delivered a sealed note. He opened it, read silently, then smiled. So, the Duke is inviting her into society. Charlotte stood beside the window. What will you do? He calmly folded the paper. We shall give society exactly what it desires. And that is a scandal. He walked toward the fireplace. The ball will be crowded. So accidents become remarkably believable. He dropped the note into the flames. When there are hundreds of witnesses. Charlotte's confidence wavered. You mean to ruin Eleanor? Lord Beaumont looked at her.
No.
His voice remained chillingly calm. I mean to remove her. The night before the charity ball, Eleanor struggled to sleep. She wandered into the mansion's west corridor. Moonlight spilled across polished floors. As she passed an old portrait, something caught her eye. She stopped. The painting depicted Lady Victoria Ashford, the Duke's late mother. Elegant.
Kind.
Dressed in pale blue silk. Around her neck hung a sapphire pendant. Eleanor's breath caught. She had seen that pendant before. Not in a painting. In a faded sketch tucked inside her father's ledger. Beneath the drawing, her father had written only 4 words. The key must return. She stepped closer to the portrait. The sapphire looked ordinary. Until moonlight struck it. A tiny engraved raven appeared inside the stone. The exact same raven hidden throughout the coded ledger. Eleanor's heartbeat quickened. The pendant wasn't jewelry. It was part of the mystery. And somewhere, inside Ravensshire House, it still existed. Morning sunlight spilled across Ravensshire House. The mansion had not been this alive in nearly 2 decades. Servants hurried through every corridor carrying polished silver, fresh flowers, and towering candelabras. Outside, gardeners clipped hedges with military precision. Inside, musicians tuned violins beneath the ballroom gallery. Everything had to be perfect. The Ravensshire Charity Ball had once been the grandest event in the county. Tonight, it would return. No one realized they were preparing for something far more dangerous than a celebration. Eleanor stood in the West Gallery staring once more at Lady Victoria Ashford's portrait. The sapphire pendant glimmered in the painted neckline. It seemed almost alive beneath the morning light. Theodore joined her quietly. You've been here twice already. She nodded. I think your mother wanted someone to find something. He looked at the portrait. My father commissioned it a year before she died. Has anyone ever examined the pendant?
No.
Do you still have it? His expression changed. I don't know. You don't know? My father locked away all of her personal belongings after the funeral. And no one opened them? Not since. Mr. Pembroke appeared carrying a large ring of antique keys. I believe, he said carefully, there is one room we have all avoided. The family archive occupied the oldest wing of Ravensshire House. Dust covered every shelf. White sheets draped forgotten furniture. No servant entered unless ordered. The heavy oak door groaned as Pembroke unlocked it. Cold air drifted outward. Theodore stepped inside first. This room belonged to my father. Everything remained exactly as it had 16 years earlier. His desk, his globe, his maps, his books. Even the ink bottle had dried untouched. Time itself seemed unwilling to enter. Eleanor wandered slowly between the shelves. Then, she noticed something strange. Every portrait in the room faced forward. Except one. Lady Victoria's smaller portrait had been turned toward the wall.
She frowned.
Why would someone do that? Theodore approached. I've never noticed. He carefully lifted the painting. As he did, something metallic clicked behind the wall. Both froze. A narrow section of carved oak shifted inward with a deep grinding sound. Dust filled the air. A hidden compartment. Mr. Pembroke whispered. My God. Inside rested a single velvet box, untouched for years. Theodore reached for it. His fingers hesitated. Then he opened the lid. There rested the sapphire pendant, exactly as it appeared in the portrait. Wrapped beside it lay 3 sealed letters. The first bore Lady Victoria's elegant handwriting. The second, Edmund Ashford, the Duke's father. The third, Nathaniel Ashcombe, Eleanor's father. No one spoke. Finally, Theodore broke the seal on his mother's letter. His hands shook. He had not expected that. My dearest Theodore, if you are reading this, then the people I feared have already failed to destroy everything. The Duke stopped breathing. His mother had written the letter to him. Not to her husband. Not to Parliament. To her son. He continued reading. Never hate your father. He has been deceived as completely as I have. Trust Nathaniel Ashcombe. Trust his daughter, if she survives us. Theodore looked up. His eyes met Eleanor's. Neither spoke. He unfolded the final page. One day, she will save you. Silence filled the hidden chamber. Even Pembroke looked unable to speak. Eleanor slowly opened her father's letter. The ink had faded, but the handwriting remained clear. Victoria, if the Beaumont family succeeds, my daughter will inherit only lies. If your son survives, tell him one thing. Never judge Eleanor by the life she appears to have lived. Judge her by the life she was forced to surrender. Eleanor's eyes blurred. Not from tears. From disbelief. Her father had known. He had known she would one day meet Theodore. Years before either child had grown old enough to understand. Mr. Pembroke carefully examined the pendant. There is something engraved. He turned the sapphire beneath the light. A tiny raven appeared, exactly like the hidden symbols inside the ledger. But beneath the raven, another marking, a keyhole. The sapphire was not simply jewelry. It was
A key.
Before anyone could examine it further, a frantic knock echoed through the archive. Mrs. Sinclair burst inside. Your Grace. What is it? A footman has been found unconscious. Theodore immediately straightened. Where? The south servants' corridor. He was carrying invitations for tonight's ball. Pembroke frowned. Robbery. Mrs. Sinclair shook her head. No, she swallowed. The invitations remain. Then what was taken? She looked directly at Theodore. The guest list. The room became still. Every important family in southern England would attend tonight. Someone now knew exactly who would be inside Raven's higher house, and exactly where Eleanor would be. That evening, the first carriages began arriving before sunset. Golden lanterns illuminated the enormous staircase. Ladies descended wearing gowns of emerald, ivory, ruby, and silver. Gentlemen bowed. Footmen announced titles one after another. The ballroom sparkled like another world. Whispers followed Theodore everywhere. That's the Duke. They say the abandoned bride is here. No. I heard she's living in the house. With children. How scandalous. Upstairs, Mrs. Sinclair helped Eleanor fasten her gown. Deep sapphire silk. Simple. Elegant. No diamonds. Only one piece of jewelry. Lady Victoria's sapphire pendant. It rested gently against her collarbone. Mrs. Sinclair smiled. It suits you. It belonged to the Duke's mother. I know. She adjusted the ribbon softly. It almost looks as though it always belonged to you. Downstairs, the orchestra began the opening waltz. The ballroom doors opened. Theodore stood waiting at the foot of the staircase. He looked up, then forgot entirely that hundreds of guests surrounded him. Eleanor descended slowly. The sapphire caught the candlelight. A murmur swept through the ballroom. Several elderly ladies gasped. One old lord whispered, "Victoria's pendant." Another replied, "It cannot be." Charlotte Beaumont felt every ounce of color leave her face. She gripped her fan so tightly, the ivory ribs snapped. Lord Augustus Beaumont did not look surprised. He looked furious. He leaned toward Charlotte. "So, they found it," Charlotte whispered. "What do we do?" His answer came, without hesitation. "We proceed." The orchestra played louder. Theodore offered Eleanor his hand. She accepted. Together they stepped onto the polished ballroom floor. Every eye followed them. Neither noticed. High above the ballroom, hidden behind the musicians' gallery, a lone figure quietly assembled a long rifle. The barrel slid between carved wooden railings. Its aim never wavered. It pointed directly at Eleanor. The first notes of the waltz floated gracefully beneath the crystal chandeliers. For a single, perfect moment, Raven's higher house felt alive again. The guests watched in silence as Theodore led Eleanor onto the polished ballroom floor. No one whispered. No one laughed. Even those who had arrived hoping for scandal found themselves strangely captivated. The Duke had not danced since his mother's death. For 16 years, the ballroom had remained empty. Tonight, only one woman had persuaded him to return. "You dance well," Eleanor said quietly. "I had an excellent teacher." "Your mother?" A faint smile crossed his lips. "I barely remember the lessons. But you remembered enough." "I remembered because she insisted that a gentleman never lets his partner fear she will fall." Eleanor looked into his eyes. "You've changed," he answered without hesitation. "So have you." She laughed softly. "I was always like this." "No." He shook his head. "I simply never bothered to see." Around them, the whispers slowly returned. Lady Beatrice Norwood hid behind her fan. "I've never seen His Grace look at anyone that way." Her husband frowned. "Which way?" As though he regrets an entire lifetime. High above the ballroom, a gloved finger tightened against a trigger. The assassin never blinked. The rifle remained perfectly steady. Its sight rested upon Eleanor's heart. Lord Augustus Beaumont glanced toward the musicians' gallery. Almost imperceptibly, he nodded. The explosion echoed through the ballroom. Boom! The crystal chandeliers trembled. Guests screamed. Glass shattered across the marble floor. Instinct moved Theodore before thought ever could. He seized Eleanor's waist and threw both of them sideways. The bullet tore through the air where her heart had been an instant earlier. Instead, it struck a marble column. Stone exploded in every direction. Panic erupted. Ladies cried out. Gentlemen rushed toward the exits. Musicians abandoned their instruments. Children who had been watching from the upper gallery began crying. "Down!" Theodore shouted. "Everyone stay down." His commanding voice cut through the chaos. Years of military discipline returned instantly. Footmen locked the doors. Estate guards drew pistols. Mr. Pembroke pointed upward. The gallery. The assassin fired again. The second bullet struck a chandelier chain. With a deafening crash, hundreds of crystal pieces rained toward the ballroom floor. Theodore pushed Eleanor beneath an enormous oak banquet table. Crystal exploded across the marble where they had stood seconds earlier. She looked up. "You saved me." He barely looked at her. "I intend to continue." Estate guards stormed the upper gallery. The assassin disappeared into the darkness. Moments later, a window burst open. Cold night air rushed inside. "He's on the roof," someone shouted. Outside, the masked man sprinted across the slate rooftops of Raven's higher house. Moonlight reflected from whetstone. Behind him, 3 guards gave chase. He reached the western tower.
Jumped.
Caught the next roof. Never slowed. Then, a gunshot echoed from below. One guard collapsed. Not from the assassin's weapon. From another shooter hidden in the gardens. There had been 2 assassins. The first escaped into the forest. The second vanished among the hedges. The attack had been planned with military precision. Inside the ballroom, doctors examined the injured. Remarkably, no one had died. Several guests suffered cuts from shattered crystal. One elderly baron had sprained an ankle, but the intended victim remained unharmed. Because one man had moved faster than a bullet, Eleanor stood quietly while Mrs. Sinclair brushed fragments of crystal from her gown. Her hands trembled, not from fear, from realization. Someone had truly intended to kill her. Not frighten, not disgrace.
Kill.
Across the room, Theodore questioned every servant personally. When did the gallery become accessible? No one knows, Your Grace. Who inspected it? The evening steward. Where is he? Silence. The steward could not be found. Mr. Pembroke approached carrying a leather satchel. We found this. Inside lay a folded servant's uniform, a false beard, a forged invitation,
And a small silver coin.
The Duke examined it closely. One side displayed the royal crest, the other, a raven pierced by a sword. The same raven from the ledger, only altered, defaced. Eleanor looked over his shoulder. I've seen that symbol. Where? My father's notes. She frowned. He called it, then suddenly remembered. The Black Covenant. Pembroke looked alarmed. I've heard that name before. Theodore turned sharply. Where? My grandfather served your grandfather. He once spoke of a secret society of powerful families. What kind of society? One that settled disputes without courts. Eleanor whispered, by murder. Before anyone could speak further, a footman rushed inside. Your Grace. What now? We've caught someone. The prisoner knelt inside the estate guardroom. His wrists were bound. His lip bled. Theodore entered first. Then Eleanor. The man's face remained lowered. Look at me. Slowly, he obeyed. Eleanor gasped. I know him. Theodore frowned. You do. He worked at Ashcombe House. The man closed his eyes. I was the stable master. Mrs. Whitcomb arrived moments later. Harrison. The old servant nodded miserably. I'm sorry. Eleanor stared in disbelief. You let them into the manor. I had no choice. Everyone has a choice. He laughed bitterly. You've never met Lord Beaumont. Silence. He owns my debts. He threatened my wife, my children. Tears formed in his eyes. They said if I refused, they would disappear. Theodore stepped forward. Who ordered the attack? Harrison hesitated, then answered. Lord Augustus Beaumont. Who fired the rifle? I don't know. They never showed their faces. Why, Eleanor? Harrison looked directly at her. Because. His voice broke. They believe she's the last witness. The room fell silent. Eleanor shook her head. I was a child. They don't care. Harrison swallowed hard. They believe your father told you everything before he died. He didn't. They won't believe that. Theodore slowly untied the man's wrists. Everyone looked at him in surprise. Your Grace? You'll testify. Harrison stared. You aren't imprisoning me?
No.
You'll help destroy the men who frightened you. The stable master began crying openly. No one has ever offered me that. Just then, another servant burst into the guardroom. Your Grace. What is it now? The archive. What about it? The hidden compartment. He struggled to catch his breath. It's empty. Theodore's expression hardened. What? The letters. The originals. They're gone. Only Lady Victoria's sapphire pendant remained. Someone had entered Ravenhire House during the panic. Someone who knew exactly where the hidden chamber was. And they had stolen the only evidence that could expose a conspiracy buried for 20 years. Someone inside the house was still betraying them. The ballroom had fallen silent. Where laughter had filled Ravenhire House only an hour before, now fear lingered in every corridor. The guests had departed under heavy guard. No carriage left the estate without inspection. Every servant remained inside. Every gate was locked. For the first time in generations, Ravenhire House had become a fortress. Theodore stood at the center of the entrance hall. His voice echoed through the marble corridors. No one leaves. The assembled servants exchanged nervous glances. Mrs. Sinclair stepped forward. Your Grace. He looked at the woman who had managed the household since before he was born. Until I know who betrayed this family, his eyes swept across every face. Every person in this house is equally suspected. No one protested. Even the innocent understood. Someone among them had nearly murdered a guest beneath their own roof. An hour later, the library had become an investigation room. Maps covered one table. Guest lists another. The stolen letters. The failed assassination. The forged deeds. Each mystery pointed toward the same invisible enemy. Yet none revealed a name. Eleanor sat near the fire. Lady Victoria's sapphire pendant rested in her hand. She turned it slowly beneath the candlelight. The tiny raven engraving seemed deeper than before. Almost too perfect. Theodore. He looked up from the documents. Yes, this engraving isn't decorative. He crossed the room. What do you mean? She placed the pendant beneath the magnifying lens. Look carefully. He leaned closer. Inside the raven's wings, hundreds of impossibly tiny lines formed another pattern. Not feathers. Writing. Microscopic writing. Mr. Pembroke adjusted his spectacles. Incredible. Eleanor carefully rotated the sapphire. The hidden letters finally aligned. 3 words appeared. Behind father's clock. Theodore frowned. My father's clock? Pembroke looked toward the ceiling. The library. The long case clock. Without another word, the 3 hurried downstairs. The great-grandfather clock stood against the west wall exactly where it had stood for 50 years. Its hands had stopped at 11:17, the hour of Edmund Ashford's funeral. No one had wound it since. Theodore examined the wooden carvings. Nothing. Eleanor gently touched the carved raven near the base. It shifted. Click. A narrow compartment opened. Inside rested a small brass key. And 1 folded page. Only one. The hidden letters had been stolen. But whoever searched the compartment had overlooked this. Theodore unfolded the paper. His father's handwriting. Strong. Confident. The ink remained dark despite the years. He began reading aloud. If these instructions are found, then I have already failed. There is one person inside Raven's higher house whom you must trust above all others. Theodore stopped. His eyes widened. The final line read, Mrs. Sinclair knows everything. The room became still. Mrs. Sinclair, the woman who had served his family for 32 years. The woman who had dressed him as a child. Who had comforted him after his mother's funeral. Who had welcomed Eleanor. Who had helped fasten Lady Victoria's pendant around her neck. She knew everything? Where is she? Theodore asked quietly. A footman swallowed. She retired nearly an hour ago. Bring her. The servant hurried away. Minutes later he returned. Alone. Your Grace. What? She's gone. The housekeeper's room stood empty. Her wardrobe remained untouched. Her personal Bible still rested upon the bedside table. Nothing suggested she had planned to leave. Except the window stood open. Rain drifted across the floorboards. Outside, estate guards searched the gardens with lanterns. One called out, Over here. They found footprints leading toward the old chapel. Theodore, Eleanor, and Pembroke hurried after them. The trail ended beside Lady Victoria's memorial garden. There, lying beneath the marble angel statue, Mrs. Sinclair's bonnet, covered in blood. Eleanor's heart sank. No. Theodore knelt immediately. The blood was fresh. Very fresh. But there was no body. Only signs of a struggle. Broken branches. Dragged footprints. A torn piece of black velvet. The same fabric worn by the masked men. They took her. Pembroke whispered. The Duke slowly stood. They didn't silence a traitor. He looked toward the forest. They kidnapped a witness. Eleanor suddenly remembered something. She told me something. When? This afternoon. What? While helping me dress. Theodore waited. Eleanor closed her eyes, replaying the conversation. Mrs. Sinclair had smiled while fastening the sapphire, then quietly said, If anything happens tonight, trust the woman in the painting. At the time, Eleanor had assumed she meant Lady Victoria. Now, the words sounded different. The woman in the painting? She whispered. The portrait. Theodore frowned. There are dozens.
No.
She shook her head. The portrait in the West Gallery. The one where I found the pendant. Without waiting, she hurried upstairs. The enormous painting still hung where it always had. Lady Victoria smiled serenely from beneath layers of oil paint. Eleanor stepped closer. Something caught her eye. A tiny scratch, near the edge of the canvas. Not old.
Fresh.
Someone had cut the painting recently. She gently lifted the corner. Hidden behind the frame was another folded paper, smaller than a letter. Only a single sentence, written in Lady Victoria's own hand. Never trust the man with my husband's ring. Theodore stared at the note. My father's ring?
No.
Eleanor whispered. She didn't write my husband's hand. She wrote, the man with my husband's ring. The Duke's expression slowly changed. His father had died wearing the Ashford signet ring. It had disappeared before the funeral. The family assumed grave robbers had stolen it. But if someone else now possessed that ring, they could impersonate Edmund Ashford, sign documents, issue orders, forge authority. Suddenly, the forged estate deeds made terrifying sense. Before anyone could speak, a loud knock echoed through the mansion. A soaked messenger stumbled inside. He carried an official government dispatch. For His Grace. Theodore broke the royal seal. His expression hardened with every line. Eleanor watched the color leave his face. What is it? He lowered the paper. Parliament has issued an injunction. For what? The investigation. They're stopping it? He nodded once. Effective immediately. Pembroke whispered. Impossible. Theodore slowly folded the order.
No.
His voice became colder than anyone had ever heard. Not impossible. Influential. Whoever stood behind Lord Beaumont had now reached into Parliament itself. The conspiracy was no longer about two families. It reached the highest levels of English power. And somewhere, Mrs. Sinclair was still alive. If they did not find her soon, the last witness to Lady Victoria's secret would disappear forever. For the first time in the history of Ravensshire House, the Duke of Ravensshire openly defied Parliament. The official order lay untouched upon his desk. Its royal seal remained unbroken where Theodore had folded it. He looked toward Mr. Pembroke. If Parliament wishes this investigation buried. He stood slowly. Then someone inside Parliament is afraid. Pembroke nodded. That was my conclusion as well. Good. The Duke walked toward the window overlooking the eastern gardens. Because I have no intention of stopping. The following morning, every newspaper in London praised the government's swift intervention. According to the headlines, the forged estate documents had been declared a misunderstanding. The attempted assassination at the charity ball was dismissed as the work of an unstable intruder. No mention was made of Lord Beaumont. No mention of the missing letters. No mention of Mrs. Sinclair. Someone had already begun rewriting history. Eleanor folded the newspaper. They're erasing it. Theodore answered quietly. They've been erasing the truth for 20 years. A knock interrupted them. One of the younger footmen entered carrying a small wooden box. It was left outside the servants' entrance before dawn. No messenger? None. The box bore no name. Only the carved symbol of a raven. Eleanor's pulse quickened. The same carving as the ledger. Theodore carefully opened the lid. Inside lay Mrs. Sinclair's silver housekeeper's keys. Beside them, a tiny scrap of paper. Only 6 words were written. She trusted the Whitechapel. Pembroke frowned. The Whitechapel? Eleanor looked thoughtful. There isn't one on the estate. There was. An elderly gardener standing near the doorway spoke for the first time. Everyone turned. Old Samuel had worked at Ravensshire House longer than anyone alive. He removed his cap respectfully. My late father mentioned it. The old family chapel. Hidden in Blackwood Forest. They abandoned it decades ago. Within the hour, Theodore's carriage left the estate. Only 4 people traveled inside. The Duke, Eleanor, Mr. Pembroke, old Samuel. No guards. The fewer who knew, the safer Mrs. Sinclair might remain. Blackwood Forest stretched for miles. Ancient oaks blocked much of the morning sun. Branches intertwined overhead like the ceiling of an old cathedral. Eventually, Samuel raised a trembling hand. There, almost completely swallowed by ivy, stood a forgotten stone chapel. Its bell tower had long since collapsed. Its stained glass windows were broken. Nature had nearly reclaimed it. Yet, someone had visited recently. Fresh horse tracks marked the muddy path. Theodore drew a pistol. "You remain behind me." Eleanor opened her mouth to protest. He looked at her. That was not a request. She almost smiled. "You're becoming impossible." "So I've been told." The heavy wooden doors groaned as they entered. Dust floated through beams of pale light. The chapel appeared abandoned. The altar remained. The pews had rotted. Birds nested beneath the rafters. Nothing suggested anyone had lived there, until Eleanor noticed the floor. The stones. Theodore looked down. One flagstone appeared cleaner than the rest. She knelt, pressed gently.
Click.
A section of the altar slowly shifted aside. Cold air rushed upward. A hidden staircase. Samuel whispered, "I've lived 70 years, and never knew." The underground chamber remained astonishingly well preserved. Bookshelves lined the walls. A narrow bed stood in one corner. Maps covered a large oak table. Candles, long burned away, still rested in silver holders. This had not been a hiding place. It had been a command center. Lady Victoria had planned for betrayal. Eleanor carefully picked up a leather journal. The first page read, "Private Notes, Victoria Ashford." Theodore remained motionless. He had spent 16 years believing his mother had left nothing behind. Now, her voice surrounded him. He opened the journal. The first entry was dated 18 years earlier. Edmund still refuses to believe the Beaumonts are stealing from the crown. Another page. Nathaniel says the evidence is almost complete. Another. If anything happens to us, Eleanor and Theodore must never be allowed to meet until they are old enough to choose wisely. The Duke stared at the sentence. Eleanor looked over his shoulder. Our parents. They were working together. Mr. Pembroke searched another shelf. My God. He carefully removed a thick ledger. Unlike Nathaniel Ashcombe's coded book, this one contained names. Dozens of names. Judges, merchants, members of parliament, bankers, each followed by sums of money.
Bribes.
An organized network of corruption. At the very bottom, one name made Theodore's blood run cold. Edmund Ashford. Amount paid, 0. Status. Refused. He wasn't involved. Theodore whispered. He refused. Eleanor nodded, which made him dangerous. Just then, a faint voice echoed from deeper within the chamber. Help. Everyone froze. Theodore lifted his lantern. Mrs. Sinclair? Another weak cry answered. Your Grace. They hurried toward the sound. Behind a false wall, they found her.
Bound. Bruised.
Barely conscious. She smiled weakly. I knew. You'd ignore Parliament. Theodore knelt beside her. Who did this? They came, looking for Lady Victoria's journal. She looked toward the bookshelf. They never found it. After cutting her free, Theodore offered water. Mrs. Sinclair drank slowly, then looked directly at Eleanor. There isn't much time. What do you mean? They know. Know what? Mrs. Sinclair reached inside her torn sleeve. From a hidden pocket, she removed a small velvet pouch.
Inside
rested an old gold signet ring. The Ashford family ring. The one believed lost for 16 years. Theodore stared in disbelief. My father's ring. Mrs. Sinclair nodded. Lady Victoria gave it to me. Why? So no one could forge Edmund's authority. Eleanor looked confused. But someone has been using the ring. Mrs. Sinclair shook her head.
No.
They've been using. She struggled for breath. A copy. Silence filled the chamber. The forged deeds. The false signatures. The false authority. Everything suddenly made sense. Someone had spent decades pretending to possess power they never truly held. Before Theodore could ask another question, a thunderous explosion shook the chapel. Stone rained from the ceiling. Samuel shouted, "They've found us!" Outside, hooves thundered across the forest.
Dozens of them.
The Duke extinguished the lantern immediately. Darkness swallowed the chamber. Only the sound of approaching riders remained. Lord Beaumont had discovered the Whitechapel. And this time, he had not come with thieves. He had come with an army. The first explosion shattered the chapel's eastern wall. Dust poured from the ceiling. Stone cracked beneath centuries of neglect. Above them, horses screamed. Men shouted. Steel clashed against ancient oak doors. The hidden refuge had been discovered. Theodore extinguished the lantern. Darkness swallowed the underground chamber. Only Mrs. Sinclair's strained breathing disturbed the silence. Mr. Pembroke whispered, "They'll search every room." Samuel tightened his grip on the old hunting rifle hanging beside the door. "They'll find the passage."
No.
Mrs. Sinclair answered weakly. "Not this one." She pointed toward the back wall. Lady Victoria had another escape route built. Theodore lifted his lantern just enough to reveal a carved raven above an old bookshelf. He pressed it. With a deep groan, the shelf slowly rotated. A narrow tunnel stretched into darkness. Cold air drifted toward them. Above, another explosion shook the chapel. This time, pieces of stained glass crashed into the sanctuary. A commanding voice echoed through the ruins. "Lady Eleanor Ashcombe, Lord Augustus Beaumont." His voice carried with effortless authority. "You have 1 minute. Surrender the journals. No one else need die." Theodore quietly smiled. He always did enjoy speeches. Eleanor looked at him. "You've met him before?" "Only twice. And I disliked him immediately. Despite everything," she laughed. It lasted barely a second. But in the darkness, it reminded everyone why they were fighting. They entered the tunnel. Pembroke closed the hidden door behind them. The passage descended steeply beneath the forest. The air smelled of damp stone and earth. Water dripped somewhere in the distance. Mrs. Sinclair leaned heavily upon Eleanor. "I'm sorry." Eleanor frowned. "For what?" "For waiting so long. You protected the truth." "I protected it," the elderly woman whispered painfully. "Because your parents asked me to." The tunnel widened into an old storage chamber. Ancient barrels lined the walls. Collapsed crates rested beneath thick dust. Samuel paused suddenly. "There are footprints. Fresh ones." Someone else had used the tunnel recently. Theodore knelt. One person. Heavy boots. They knew the route. Pembroke's face darkened. Then Lord Beaumont already knew about this passage. Mrs. Sinclair slowly shook her head.
No.
"He knows. Because someone told him." Silence. The traitor remained alive. Still hidden. Still watching. Far above, Lord Beaumont entered the ruined chapel. The hidden chamber stood empty. Books scattered across the floor. Candles overturned. The secret bookshelf remained slightly ajar. He smiled. They escaped. Charlotte Beaumont stepped carefully over fallen stone. "You don't seem concerned." "I'm not." He examined the tunnel entrance. "They're heading exactly where I expected." She looked confused. "You wanted them to escape?" He folded his gloves. "I wanted them to lead me." Miles away, the tunnel finally emerged inside a forgotten hunting lodge overlooking Raven's higher valley. Morning sunlight poured through broken shutters. Fresh horses waited outside. Theodore frowned immediately. "They're saddled." Samuel whispered, "Someone has been here." A loaf of bread still rested on the table.
Warm.
A kettle steamed gently above the fire. Whoever had occupied the lodge had left only moments earlier. Eleanor noticed something folded beneath a teacup. A letter, addressed simply, "For Lady Eleanor." Her hands trembled slightly as she unfolded it. The handwriting was unfamiliar. The message contained only one sentence. "Trust the Black Raven, not the man who wears his name." She looked up. "What does this mean?" Mrs. Sinclair's eyes widened. "The Black Raven." Theodore turned immediately. "You know him?" She nodded slowly.
No.
"I know who everyone believed he was." The room became silent. Mrs. Sinclair settled carefully into a chair. For several moments, she simply stared into the fire. Finally, she spoke. 25 years ago. The Black Raven wasn't a man. Everyone looked at her. It was a title. Pembroke frowned. A title? She nodded. A secret guardian chosen by several honest, noble families. The Black Raven gathered evidence against corruption. He protected children, widows, orphans. He delivered proof of crimes directly to the crown. Theodore listened carefully. My mother knew him? Mrs. Sinclair smiled sadly. She was one. Silence. Absolute silence. Eleanor felt her breath catch. Lady Victoria. Was the Black Raven? Mrs. Sinclair nodded. Before her, Nathaniel Ashcombe. She looked toward Eleanor. Your father. Then at Theodore. After him. Your mother. Theodore struggled to speak. My mother led the organization? Yes. And after she died? Mrs. Sinclair lowered her eyes. There was no one left. The title disappeared. The honest family scattered. Lord Beaumont seized control. One by one, the people who resisted either vanished or were ruined. Eleanor slowly looked at the letter again. Trust the Black Raven, not the man who wears his name. She whispered, someone is pretending to be the Black Raven. Mrs. Sinclair nodded. For years. They stole the symbol. They murdered in its name. They turned hope into fear. Theodore walked toward the window. Beyond the hills, Raven's higher house stood faintly visible. Smoke curled peacefully from its chimneys. Children were there, safe, or so he hoped. He spoke without turning. If my mother truly led this order, Mrs. Sinclair answered softly. Then there is one final truth. He turned. What truth? She hesitated, long enough that everyone understood its importance. Lady Victoria chose her successor. Theodore frowned. Who? Mrs. Sinclair looked directly at Eleanor. You. Eleanor laughed softly. That isn't possible. You were 4 years old. Exactly. Mrs. Sinclair reached into her pocket. She removed a tiny silver medallion shaped like a raven. On the reverse was engraved a single date. May 4th, 1800. The day you were born. Mrs. Sinclair placed it gently into Eleanor's hand. Your father accepted. Your mother accepted. So did Lady Victoria. They believed. One day, you would restore what had been destroyed. Tears gathered in Eleanor's eyes. I've spent my entire life believing I was ordinary. Mrs. Sinclair smiled. No, my dear. You spent your life believing the lie they wanted you to believe. Suddenly, a distant church bell echoed across the valley. Once. Twice. Then a third time. Samuel's face strained of color. That's the Raven's higher bell. Pembroke looked out the window. Smoke. Not from chimneys. From the western wing. Theodore's voice turned to ice. They've attacked the house. Eleanor's heart stopped. The children. Without another word, the Duke sprinted toward his horse. Behind him, everyone followed. Because whatever Lord Beaumont had truly wanted, it had never been the journals. It had never been the ledger. It had been to lure them away from the 81 children waiting at Raven's higher house. The ride back to Raven's higher house became a race against time. No one spoke. The only sounds were pounding hooves, labored breathing, and the church bells that continued ringing across the valley. Each toll carried the same terrible message. Fire. Theodore pushed his horse harder than he ever had before. Branches whipped across his riding coat. Mud splashed beneath galloping hooves. Behind him, Eleanor refused to slow. Her horse struggled to match the Duke's pace. Yet she urged it forward with quiet determination. She wasn't thinking about the journals. She wasn't thinking about Lord Beaumont. She was thinking about Lucy, Thomas, James, Emily, 81 children. As they crested the final hill, everyone froze. Raven's higher house burned. The western wing stood wrapped in roaring orange flames. Black smoke curled hundreds of feet into the evening sky. Servants formed frantic bucket lines. Estate guards shouted orders. Carriages crowded the courtyard. Children cried somewhere inside. Theodore's face turned white. No. Before anyone could stop him, he spurred his horse straight through the open gates. Mrs. Sinclair grabbed Eleanor's arm. Wait. Eleanor looked toward the flames. I can't. The roof is collapsing. The children are inside. So are you if you go. Eleanor gently pulled free. They've already lost too many people. She looked directly at the elderly housekeeper. I won't become another. Then she ran. The entrance hall had become chaos. Smoke rolled across the ceiling. Servants carried water upstairs. Footmen smashed windows. Doctors treated the injured near the grand staircase. Mrs. Whitcomb rushed toward Eleanor. Thank heaven. How many? 78 are outside. Eleanor's heart stopped. 78. Mrs. Whitcomb nodded. 3 are missing.
Who?
Lucy. A pause. James. And little Oliver. Eleanor didn't wait for another word. She ran toward the burning west wing. The doors blocked. A guard shouted. The staircase has collapsed. Theodore looked upward. Second floor nursery. The 3 youngest children. Still trapped. He scanned the smoke. Then noticed something. The old ivy climbing the western wall. It reached nearly to the nursery balcony. Without hesitation, he climbed. Theodore. Eleanor shouted. He never looked back. Stone crumbled beneath his boots. Flames licked from broken windows. Halfway up, a burning beam crashed onto the ivy. The entire wall shook. Guests watching from the courtyard gasped. Still, the Duke climbed. Inside the nursery, Lucy held Oliver tightly. James stood beside the window, crying. Smoke filled the room. The door glowed red with heat. Lucy looked toward the ceiling. Miss Eleanor said, heroes always come. James sobbed. What if they don't? Lucy answered with remarkable certainty. They always do. The nursery window exploded inward. Glass scattered across the floor. Theodore climbed inside. His coat immediately caught sparks. Lucy threw herself toward him. I knew you'd come. He scooped Oliver into one arm, James into the other. Where's Lucy? She frowned. I'm here. No. He smiled despite everything. I need both hands. Lucy climbed onto his back, wrapping tiny arms around his neck. There. Now we can go. Outside. The crowd erupted into cheers. They're alive. Eleanor looked upward.
Then.
Her smile disappeared. The ivy had begun burning. Theodore couldn't climb down. A loud crack echoed through the manor. The western tower shifted. Pembroke shouted. The wall. The entire balcony lurched forward. Stone began breaking away beneath Theodore's feet. There was no time. Eleanor, he called. She looked up. Catch Lucy. Without waiting for agreement, he lifted the little girl. Lucy screamed. Theodore threw her outward. Every person in the courtyard gasped. Eleanor sprinted forward. At the last possible moment, she caught the child. Both tumbled safely onto the grass. Again, James came next. Then Oliver. Each child landed safely in waiting arms. The crowd cheered wildly. But Theodore remained trapped. The balcony groaned. One support beam finally snapped. Pembroke shouted desperately. Jump. The drop measured nearly 30 feet. Below, only stone. The Duke looked once toward Eleanor. Their eyes met through the smoke. She shook her head. No. He smiled. The same quiet smile she had first seen in the orphanage. If I don't. The balcony shifted again. The children still need you. Before she could answer, the balcony collapsed. Theodore disappeared into fire and falling stone. Silence. Then, Eleanor. A voice shouted. She refused to believe what she had seen. She ran straight into the burning building. Guards grabbed her. She fought them. Let me go. The roof's falling. He's still inside. It isn't safe. I don't care. Just then, a crash echoed from another hallway. The library doors burst open. Covered in soot, bleeding from his forehead. Theodore staggered through the smoke carrying something beneath one arm. Not papers. Not treasure. The old Raven's higher family portrait of Lady Victoria. He had gone back. For his mother. Eleanor reached him just as he collapsed. You fool. Her voice trembled. You impossible, stubborn fool. He looked up weakly. I remembered. A painful cough interrupted him. What you said. She blinked.
What?
A home. He looked toward the frightened children gathered across the lawn. Isn't walls. It never was. His eyes found hers. It's the people waiting outside. For the first time, she didn't hide her tears. The fire was finally brought under control shortly after midnight. Half the West Wing had been destroyed, but every child survived. Not a single life had been lost. The villagers called it a miracle. Theodore called it something else. Eleanor. As dawn approached, investigators searched the burned ruins. One guard suddenly shouted, Your Grace. Theodore turned. What is it? The guard held up a charred metal lantern. Its glass had shattered, but its oil reservoir remained intact. Pembroke examined it carefully. His face hardened. This wasn't an accident. Theodore already knew.
No.
Pembroke pointed inside the lantern. A strange chemical residue coated the metal. Military-grade lamp oil. It burns twice as hot and spreads 3 times faster. Only one group in England had access to it. The Royal Army, or someone with powerful military connections. Eleanor quietly looked toward the smoking ruins. This wasn't about killing us. Theodore nodded. It was about making us choose. The children, or the evidence. Pembroke looked confused. What evidence? The Duke slowly unfolded the family portrait he had carried from the flames. Its wooden frame had cracked. The canvas had torn. Behind it, hidden between 2 layers of linen, was another sealed document, untouched by fire. Lady Victoria had hidden one final secret, and someone had been willing to burn an entire estate to make sure it was never found. Morning arrived beneath a sky the color of ash. Smoke still drifted from the ruins of Raven's higher house. The West Wing had survived. Barely. Blackened stones stood, where children's laughter had echoed only hours before. Yet across the eastern lawns, those same children now chased one another through the dew. Their laughter had returned. That, Theodore decided, was victory. Inside the library, the burned portrait of Lady Victoria rested upon a large oak table. The frame had split apart during the fire. Behind the torn canvas, exactly as Pembroke had suspected, lay another sealed envelope. Unlike the others, its wax seal remained untouched. A raven surrounded by a crown. Mrs. Sinclair inhaled sharply. I haven't seen that seal since Lady Victoria died. Theodore carefully lifted the letter. Across the front, in elegant handwriting, were only 6 words. To my son, when truth is safe. He closed his eyes briefly. It never was. With steady hands, he broke the seal. My beloved Theodore, if you are reading this, then someone has finally failed to silence us. That alone gives me hope. The Duke continued silently for several moments. His expression changed. Then, without speaking, he handed the letter to Eleanor. She began reading aloud. The man you believe to be your greatest enemy is not the one who built this conspiracy. Lord Beaumont is merely its steward. There is another. A man whose title is older, whose influence reaches Parliament, the courts, the army, and even the Crown's advisors. The room became still. Pembroke whispered, So Beaumont answers to someone. Mrs. Sinclair nodded slowly. I feared as much. Eleanor turned another page. More handwriting appeared. This time, Lady Victoria had written a name. Every person in the room leaned closer. And silence. The name had been deliberately cut away. Someone had taken a knife to the page decades earlier. The single most important line was gone. Theodore slammed his fist against the table. Damn it. They found this letter. And they removed only the name. Pembroke nodded grimly. Which means they never discovered where the portrait was hidden. They only knew it existed. Another folded sheet slipped from inside the envelope. Much smaller. Covered with sketches. Estate maps. Symbols. Family crests. At the center, one emblem had been circled repeatedly. A silver falcon. Not a raven. Not Beaumont's crest. A falcon. Mrs. Sinclair's face went pale. I know that crest. Theodore looked up. Whose is it? She hesitated, long enough to make everyone uneasy. It belonged to the family that supplied advisors to the crown. Pembroke frowned. They've almost disappeared.
No.
She whispered. They merely stopped using the falcon. What do they use now? She answered softly. The Royal Lion. Silence. The implication settled over the room like ice. Someone serving near the crown had protected the conspiracy. Just then, a carriage rolled into the courtyard. Not a nobleman's. Not military. Royal. Its dark blue panels bore the king's seal. Every servant hurried toward the entrance. Theodore walked outside. A distinguished elderly gentleman descended slowly. His silver hair was neatly tied, his black coat immaculate. He carried a polished leather dispatch case. He bowed respectfully. Your Grace. I am Sir Alistair Pembroke. Pembroke blinked. My uncle? The visitor smiled faintly. It has been many years. The older man turned toward Theodore. I come directly from the Home Office. The Duke's expression hardened. To stop my investigation?
No.
The visitor opened his dispatch case. He removed an official document bearing 3 royal seals. I've come to reopen it. The room fell silent. Sir Alistair continued. For 22 years, my office quietly gathered evidence. We could never prove enough. He looked toward Eleanor. Until now. Theodore placed Lady Victoria's letter beside the official papers. You believe us. Sir Alistair looked almost offended. I believed your mother. I believed Nathaniel Ashcombe. I simply lacked surviving witnesses. Mrs. Sinclair smiled sadly. You have won. The elderly statesman nodded. And now? So do we all. Hours later, the library became the center of the largest private investigation England had seen in a generation. Documents covered every surface. Maps connected estates across 5 counties. Letters linked judges, bankers, military officers, even members of parliament. Piece by piece, the conspiracy became visible, not chaos. A carefully built machine. One family ruined after another. One estate stolen after another. One suspicious death after another. All leading back, not simply to Beaumont, but to someone who had never appeared publicly. A patron, a financier, a hidden master. As dusk approached, old Samuel hurried inside carrying a leather satchel. We found this. Where? In the burned West Wing. Inside rested the guest register from the charity ball. Most pages were scorched, but one survived. Pembroke examined the signatures, then suddenly stopped. Theodore. What? Look, near the bottom, between 2 ordinary guests, one signature had been crossed out in fresh ink. Someone had attempted to erase it, yet enough remained to read. Lord Adrian Ashford. Theodore frowned. I have no relative by that name. Mrs. Sinclair slowly lowered herself into a chair. You do. Everyone turned. She looked directly at Theodore. He wasn't buried. Silence. Who? Your father's younger brother. The Duke stared at her. My uncle died before I was born.
No.
She whispered. That's what everyone was told. He disappeared. And after he vanished, the forged documents began appearing. Pembroke's face drained of color. No. Mrs. Sinclair nodded once. Lord Adrian Ashford is alive. Theodore's pulse thundered. And if Lady Victoria was right, Eleanor finished the thought. He may be the man who built everything. That same evening, far away, inside a secluded country estate, Lord Augustus Beaumont stood before a roaring fire. The doors opened. A tall gentleman entered.
Perfectly dressed.
Silver beginning to touch his dark hair. An unmistakable Ashford signet ring gleamed on his hand. Beaumont bowed. Not out of courtesy. Out of obedience. The newcomer removed his gloves. They've read Victoria's final letter. Beaumont nodded. Yes, my lord. The man smiled. Calmly. Coldly. Good. He stepped toward the fire. It is time my nephew finally met his family. The flames reflected in his eyes. And for the first time, The true architect of 22 years of betrayal stepped out of the shadows. The room remained silent. No one moved. No one breathed. Only the crackling fire inside Raven's higher house disturbed the stillness. The name echoed through every mind. Lord Adrian Ashford. Theodore slowly looked toward Mrs. Sinclair. My uncle, his voice barely carried, is alive. The elderly housekeeper nodded. I prayed I would never have to answer that question. The Duke stepped backward. Everything he believed about his family, his childhood, his inheritance, his father's grief, shifted beneath his feet. My father buried an empty coffin. Mrs. Sinclair lowered her eyes. Yes. He knew.
No.
He believed Adrian was dead. Who convinced him? She answered quietly. Adrian himself. 22 years earlier. Lady Victoria had written everything. Not in the letters, but inside her private journal. Pembroke carefully opened another page. The faded ink revealed the truth. Adrian has become obsessed with power. He believes noble blood gives him the right to govern England from the shadows. Edmund refuses to support him. Nathaniel has discovered the accounts. If Adrian is exposed, dozens of powerful men will fall beside him. Theodore closed the journal. My father opposed his own brother. Mrs. Sinclair nodded. Completely. Another page. Adrian has disappeared. He claims he intends to travel abroad. I no longer believe anything he says. I fear this is only the beginning. Pembroke looked toward Theodore. He vanished, so no one would suspect him. The Duke answered quietly. And he rebuilt everything under another name. Across the county, at Ashford Hall, Lord Adrian Ashford stood before a wall-sized map of England. Colored pins covered nearly every county.
Blue, red,
Black. Each represented an estate. Each represented influence. Each represented someone who owed him loyalty. Lord Beaumont entered. They've learned my identity. Adrian smiled faintly.
No.
They've learned my name. There is a difference. Charlotte Beaumont stood nearby. They've recovered Lady Victoria's journal. Adrian poured himself a glass of wine. And it names you. It accuses me. He corrected. Proof is another matter. Lord Beaumont hesitated. There is one concern. Adrian looked amused. Eleanor. The smile disappeared. For the first time, his expression hardened. She was never supposed to survive. Charlotte noticed something. Not anger.
Fear.
He feared Eleanor. Back at Raven's higher house, Theodore gathered everyone inside the library. We end this. Pembroke nodded.
How?
We stop defending ourselves. He spread Adrian's estate map across the table. We make him defend himself. Eleanor studied the map. He owns 13 estates. Officially. Pembroke corrected. Unofficially. Closer to 40. She pointed toward one isolated property. What is this? Samuel answered immediately. Blackmore Court. Mrs. Sinclair looked up sharply.
No.
Everyone turned. You know it. She nodded. That's where Lady Victoria confronted Adrian. What happened? Mrs. Sinclair whispered. She never returned home. Silence settled over the room. Theodore looked toward the portrait of his mother. So that was where she died. Mrs. Sinclair slowly shook her head.
No.
Everyone stared. She escaped. Theodore frowned. What? She escaped Blackmore. Then how did she die? The elderly woman's eyes filled with tears. She wasn't murdered. She was poisoned. The room seemed to grow colder. By whom? Mrs. Sinclair answered with visible pain. Someone she trusted. Eleanor looked toward the household staff gathered outside the library. A servant.
No.
Mrs. Sinclair whispered. A doctor. Pembroke immediately searched the journals. Several pages later, he found the name. Dr. Henry Carlyle. Family physician. Present during Lady Victoria's final illness. Present during Edmund Ashford's decline. Present at Nathaniel Ashcombe's final examination. The same doctor. 3 families. 3 mysterious deaths. Theodore's jaw tightened. He poisoned all of them. Mrs. Sinclair nodded. And signed every death certificate himself. A knock interrupted them. A royal courier entered carrying another sealed dispatch. Your Grace. Theodore broke the seal.
Inside.
A summons.
From the Home Office.
Sir Alastair Pembroke requested an emergency meeting in London. Attached was another note. Only one sentence. We have found the doctor. The Duke immediately stood. We leave within the hour. Eleanor stepped beside him. I'm coming.
No.
She looked directly at him. I've been hunted since the day I was born. I'm finished hiding. Theodore held her gaze for several seconds. Finally, he nodded. Together. That evening, their carriage rolled toward London. Neither spoke much. The countryside passed beneath gathering darkness. Finally, Theodore broke the silence. When I first met you, Eleanor smiled faintly. You believed I was trying to trap you. I believed everyone was. And now, he looked out the window. Now I know there is only one person who never has. She turned toward him. You trust me. I trust you. He answered quietly. More than I trust my own name. Hours later, the towers of London appeared through the mist. But something was wrong. The streets surrounding the Home Office were unusually crowded. Soldiers, mounted police, government carriages. As Theodore stepped down, Sir Alastair rushed toward him. You came quickly. What happened? The older man looked grim. We arrested Dr. Carlyle. And he agreed to testify. Theodore exhaled slowly. Then it's over. Sir Alastair didn't answer. Instead, he handed Theodore a blood-stained pocket watch. The Duke recognized it instantly. It belonged to the doctor. Inside the watch, folded tightly beneath the cover, was one final confession, written only an hour earlier. Theodore unfolded the paper. His face lost all color. Eleanor reached for it. What is it? He whispered only 4 words. Adrian isn't alone anymore. Below the sentence, the doctor had written one final name. A name that made Sir Alastair remove his hat. A name no one had expected. A name that reached all the way to the royal household. Rain washed over London. The streets glistened beneath rows of gas lamps. Inside the Home Office, no one noticed the storm. Every eye remained fixed on the blood-stained confession lying across the conference table. Theodore read the final line again, then again. Each time, it became harder to believe. Dr. Carlyle's handwriting never wavered. Even knowing death was only moments away, he had written carefully, deliberately, one final truth. The king's private advisor, Lord Reginald Hawthorne. Silence. Sir Alastair Pembroke slowly removed his spectacles. I prayed. I would never see that name. Eleanor looked toward him. You know him? The elderly statesman nodded. For 30 years. He advises ministers. He drafts royal correspondence. He recommends judges. He appoints military governors. Pembroke quietly added, he can ruin almost any man in England, without ever appearing in public. Theodore folded the confession. So Adrian controlled Parliament, and Hawthorne controlled the crown. Sir Alastair nodded once. Together, they controlled England. A young investigator hurried into the room. Sir, what is it? We searched Dr. Carlyle's residence. And we recovered 27 death certificates. The room became still. All signed by him. For natural causes. None were natural. Another officer placed a leather folder onto the table.
Inside
were names. Judges. Landowners. Merchants. Military officers. Everyone had opposed Adrian Ashford. Everyone had died within 2 years. Always after an illness. Always treated by Dr. Carlyle. Always certified by the same physician. Eleanor slowly whispered, my father never had a fever. Mrs. Sinclair had always insisted upon it. Nathaniel Ashcombe had been healthy. Then suddenly,
dead.
Theodore's hands tightened. My mother. My father. Your father. He looked at Eleanor. They murdered all of them. Sir Alastair nodded solemnly. And dozens more. Just then, the chamber doors burst open. A courier stumbled inside, soaked by the rain. My lords. He struggled to catch his breath. Hawthorne's residence. Sir Alistair stood. What about it? It's empty. The room erupted. When, an hour ago, he dismissed every servant, burned half his correspondence, and disappeared. Theodore looked toward the window. He knew. Sir Alistair answered grimly. He always knows. Meanwhile, across London, a black carriage rolled silently through narrow streets. Inside sat Lord Adrian Ashford. Opposite him, Lord Reginald Hawthorne. Neither appeared worried. Hawthorne calmly folded the evening newspaper. They've discovered us. Adrian poured another glass of wine. They've discovered yesterday. Tomorrow still belongs to us. Hawthorne looked out the carriage window. What about Beaumont? He'll delay them. And if he fails? Adrian smiled. I've never depended on Beaumont. The carriage stopped outside an abandoned warehouse near the docks. Dozens of armed men waited inside. Crates lined the walls. Not merchandise. Documents. Estate ledgers. Bribery records. Correspondence. Everything connecting the conspiracy. Adrian surveyed the mountain of evidence. Burn it. One of the men hesitated. My lord. Everything. Everything. Moments later, flames climbed toward the ceiling. 22 years of secrets began turning into ash. Back inside the Home Office, a clerk rushed toward Sir Alistair. Sir, we intercepted a messenger. What did he carry? The young man placed a sealed envelope upon the table, addressed simply, to Lady Eleanor Ashcombe. The seal bore a black raven. Not Adrian's counterfeit. The original. Mrs. Sinclair gasped. Open it. Eleanor carefully broke the seal. Inside rested a single folded sheet, along with an old silver key. The handwriting was unfamiliar, yet strangely elegant. Lady Eleanor, if this letter has reached you, then I have remained hidden exactly as Lady Victoria instructed. I am the last surviving guardian of the Black Raven. Your parents never intended for you to inherit revenge. Only justice. The final archive remains untouched. Use the enclosed key. Come before sunrise. Come alone. At the bottom, only a signature. R. Pembroke frowned. Who is R? Mrs. Sinclair slowly smiled. There was always one more guardian. You know who? No. But Lady Victoria trusted only one person enough to hide the final archive. Sir Alistair suddenly looked alarmed. The Royal Records Vault. Everyone turned. What? The old underground archive beneath Westminster. He looked at the silver key. That key doesn't open a house. It opens a government vault. Theodore stood immediately. Then we're going. Eleanor quietly folded the letter. It says alone. I'm ignoring that. So am I. She smiled. For the first time in days. So did he. Before anyone could leave, another officer burst into the chamber. His face was pale. Sir Alistair? What now? The warehouse fire. What warehouse? The docks. The one Adrian leased. Sir Alistair frowned. Was anything recovered? The officer swallowed hard. No. But what? We found a body. Theodore's pulse quickened. Whose? The answer stunned the room. Lord Augustus Beaumont. Silence. He was executed. One bullet. Back of the head. No witnesses. No struggle. No warning. Only one message pinned to his coat. Written in Adrian Ashford's unmistakable hand. Loose ends are dangerous. Theodore stared at the note, then quietly folded it. He's cleaning the board. Sir Alistair nodded. And we're running out of time. Far away, in the darkness beneath Westminster, a solitary figure unlocked an enormous iron door. Inside stretched shelves disappearing into shadow. Thousands of forgotten records. Hidden beneath them all, one oak chest. The figure placed a gentle hand upon it, then whispered into the darkness. They're finally coming. London had not yet awakened. The streets surrounding Westminster remained almost empty. A light mist drifted across the River Thames. Only the bells of distant churches disturbed the silence. The city slept, but beneath its streets, history waited. Theodore adjusted his coat as Sir Alistair unlocked a narrow iron gate hidden behind an abandoned government storehouse. Few people knew it existed. Even fewer had ever entered. The staircase descended deep beneath Westminster. Stone replaced brick. Moisture coated the ancient walls. The air grew colder with every step. Eleanor tightened her grip around the silver key. "How old is this place?" Sir Alistair answered without looking back. "Older than Parliament." Pembroke glanced upward. "Impossible."
No.
Sir Alistair smiled faintly. This vault protected royal records long before this nation called itself a kingdom. After nearly 10 minutes, the staircase ended. An enormous iron door stood before them. No handle, only a silver lock shaped like a raven. Eleanor slowly inserted the key.
Click.
The mechanism turned effortlessly. The ancient door groaned open. Every lantern seemed too small. The chamber beyond stretched farther than the eye could see. Thousands of shelves rose toward a vaulted ceiling. Leather-bound ledgers, royal decrees,
Treaties.
private correspondence. Generations of England's forgotten history rested undisturbed beneath layers of dust. At the very center, exactly as the mysterious letter had promised, sat an enormous oak chest. Its lid bore the original black raven crest. Untouched. Waiting. Mrs. Sinclair whispered through trembling lips. Lady Victoria truly succeeded. Eleanor stepped forward. For reasons she could not explain, the room felt strangely familiar, almost welcoming, as if those who had protected it were still present. She placed her hand upon the chest. The old wood felt warm. The lock opened without resistance.
Inside.
Hundreds of neatly organized files, each wrapped in black ribbon, each labeled with a family name. Ashford, Ashcombe, Norwood,
Carlisle.
Beaumont,
Hawthorne.
dozens more. Not accusations.
Proof.
Every payment, every forged deed, every bribed official, every suspicious death, every stolen estate. 22 years of corruption, preserved in perfect order. Sir Alistair slowly removed one ledger. His hands trembled. My God. Pembroke looked over his shoulder. The original banking records. They're all here. Another file. Military contracts. Another. Judicial appointments. Another. Private letters signed by Hawthorne. The conspiracy had not merely been uncovered. It had been documented. By the Black Raven itself. Then, a slow clap echoed through the chamber. Everyone turned. At the far end of the archive, a single lantern burned. Beside it stood Lord Adrian Ashford, perfectly composed, perfectly dressed, as though attending an evening reception instead of confronting the people determined to destroy him. So, his calm voice carried effortlessly across the chamber. My nephew. Theodore stepped forward. You should have stayed dead. Adrian smiled. I found living considerably more profitable. He slowly approached. His polished boots echoed against the ancient stone floor. When only a few yards separated them, he stopped. I've watched you for years. Theodore's jaw tightened. You murdered my parents. I removed obstacles. You poisoned innocent people. I preserved stability. You destroyed families. I built an empire. Eleanor spoke quietly. You call that an empire? Adrian looked toward her. I call it order. You call theft order? I call survival. He answered evenly. The privilege of intelligent men. Sir Alistair unfolded an arrest warrant. Lord Adrian Ashford. In the name of the Crown, you are under arrest. Adrian laughed. A calm, almost sympathetic laugh. You still believe paper defeats power. He raised one hand. Hidden doors along the chamber walls burst open. Nearly 20 armed men emerged. Former soldiers, mercenaries, each carrying pistols, each aiming directly at Theodore's party. Pembroke whispered, We're trapped. Theodore never moved. Instead, he slowly drew his pistol. So be it. Adrian sighed. I had hoped we might speak as family. You stopped being family, Theodore answered. The day you chose power over blood. For a brief moment, neither man blinked. The silence became unbearable. Then, A single gunshot exploded. Everyone flinched, but no one fell. The shot had struck a lantern. Darkness swallowed half the chamber. Smoke filled the air. Another shot. Then another. Chaos erupted. Sir Alistair shouted, "Protect the archive." Pembroke dragged the oak chest behind a stone pillar. Mrs. Sinclair covered the ledgers with her own body. Eleanor grabbed another lantern before it toppled into the documents. Flames could destroy everything. Not bullets. Fire. That had always been Adrian's true weapon. Theodore and Adrian disappeared into the smoke. Somewhere in the darkness, steel struck steel. A pistol clattered across stone. A heavy punch landed. Then another. Neither man spoke. Only the sounds of two Ashfords settling 22 years of betrayal. Eleanor searched desperately through the smoke. Theodore. No answer. She heard footsteps behind her. One of Adrian's men lunged toward the archive. She seized a fallen iron candle stand and swung with every ounce of strength she possessed. The blow struck his wrist. His pistol skidded across the floor. Before he recovered, Samuel tackled him. Across the chamber, another mercenary raised a torch, straight toward the oak chest. No! Eleanor ran. She threw herself between the burning torch and the archive. The flame caught her sleeve. For one terrifying second, fire climbed the fabric. Theodore saw it. He turned instantly, ignoring Adrian completely. Eleanor. He reached her just in time, tearing away the burning cloth with his bare hands. His palms blistered immediately, but the fire died. The archive remained untouched. Adrian watched silently, then smiled. There it is. Theodore looked up. What? The weakness. You finally have won. He glanced toward Eleanor. And, because of her, you'll lose. The Duke slowly stood. His burned hands trembled, not from pain, from anger. He looked directly into Adrian's eyes. No. His voice echoed through the ancient vault. For the first time in my life, I finally know exactly what I'm fighting for. Before Adrian could answer, heavy footsteps thundered above them. Then another sound. Dozens of voices. Soldiers. Government troops. Sir Alistair smiled. They're here. Adrian's expression changed for the first time. Not fear. Calculation. He looked toward a hidden passage behind the archive, then back toward Theodore. This isn't over. Without another word, he disappeared into the darkness, leaving behind the greatest collection of evidence in modern English history. And one final hunt that would decide the fate of everyone involved. The underground archive echoed with hurried footsteps. Government soldiers poured into the chamber from every entrance. Lanterns illuminated the smoke that still lingered beneath the ancient stone ceiling. Sir Alistair wasted no time. Secure every document. Seal every exit. No one leaves Westminster. Dozens of officials rushed toward the Black Raven archive. For the first time in 22 years, the truth belonged to the law. But one man remained free. Lord Adrian Ashford. Theodore stood motionless near the hidden passage. His burned hands throbbed beneath hastily wrapped bandages. He ignored the pain. His eyes remained fixed on the darkness where Adrian had disappeared. He won't leave London. Sir Alistair frowned. How can you be certain? The Duke answered quietly. Because he still believes he can win. Eleanor walked beside him. He isn't running. No. Theodore nodded. He's repositioning. Samuel emerged from the narrow passage, carrying something wrapped in black velvet. We found this. Inside rested Adrian's walking cane. Elegant. Silver-handled. Pembroke examined it. Too heavy. He twisted the handle. A hidden compartment opened. Inside, a folded city map, marked in red ink. Old sewer routes. Secret government passages. Abandoned monastery tunnels. One location had been circled repeatedly. St. Bartholomew's Crypt. Mrs. Sinclair's face turned pale. Oh no. Theodore looked at her. You know it. She nodded slowly. That was where the first Black Raven gathered. The original meeting place. Pembroke whispered, then Adrian isn't escaping. He is going home. 1 hour later, The streets of London had begun to awaken. Merchants opened their shops. Milk carts rolled through narrow lanes. Church bells greeted the dawn. Hidden beneath the city, a different world existed. Theodore led a small team into the forgotten tunnels. Only Eleanor, Pembroke, Samuel, and 6 royal guards accompanied him. No army. Too many men would only slow them. The ancient passageways twisted beneath London's foundations. Some sections dated back to Roman times. Others had been carved by monks centuries later. Water dripped steadily from stone ceilings. The air smelled of damp earth. And silence. Eleanor noticed something. Fresh footprints. Someone came this way. Theodore knelt. One man. He isn't trying to hide.
No.
She whispered. He's leading us. Far ahead, Adrian walked alone.
Calmly.
His polished boots echoed through the tunnel. He never once looked behind him. He already knew they were coming.
He had planned it that way.
The crypt beneath St. Bartholomew's Church had remained sealed for generations. Massive stone pillars supported its vaulted ceiling. Ancient tombs lined the walls. At the center, a circular chamber, carved into the floor, the original black raven emblem. Adrian stood directly upon it, waiting. Theodore entered first. Their eyes met across the chamber. No guards, no servants, no lies. Only uncle and nephew. You came. Adrian smiled. I knew you would. You murdered my family. I corrected history. You poisoned your own brother. He chose weakness. He chose honor. Adrian laughed. Honor feeds no kingdom. Eleanor stepped forward.
No.
It builds one. Adrian looked toward her. So, the little orphan. The future Black Raven. He almost sounded amused. Your father should have accepted my offer. What offer? I offered Nathaniel everything. Wealth. Power. A title. What did he say? Adrian smiled faintly. He laughed. For the first time, Eleanor smiled too. Then I understand why he was my father. The remark struck Adrian harder than any insult. His expression darkened. You truly believe goodness wins? I believe truth survives. She answered. That is why you're standing here alone. Silence. Then Adrian slowly removed a small pistol. The royal guards immediately raised theirs. Theodore lifted one hand.
No.
The guards hesitated. This ends with me. Adrian nodded approvingly. Finally, the Ashford blood remembers itself. He tossed a second pistol across the stone floor. It slid to Theodore's feet. A fair contest. Eleanor grabbed Theodore's sleeve. Don't. He looked at her. I have to. The chamber fell silent. 2 Ashfords, facing one another, separated by 20 years of betrayal. On 3. Adrian said calmly. 1. Theodore never looked away. 2. Eleanor's heart pounded. 3. Both men reached. 2 shots exploded simultaneously. Smoke filled the chamber. Everyone froze. One figure staggered. The other remained standing. Then, Adrian slowly looked down. A crimson stain spread across his waistcoat. He smiled sadly. So, he whispered, Edmund really did teach you better. His pistol slipped from his hand. He fell to one knee, then another. Finally, he collapsed upon the black raven emblem. The crypt became silent. Theodore lowered his weapon. He walked slowly toward his uncle. Adrian looked upward. Not afraid. Only tired. I almost succeeded. Theodore answered quietly.
No.
You almost destroyed yourself. Adrian laughed weakly. Perhaps. His breathing slowed. Then he looked toward Eleanor. You remind me of Victoria. A faint smile crossed his face. That is why I feared you. Those were his final words. The last architect of the conspiracy closed his eyes. Forever. No one celebrated. Not even Theodore. There was only silence. Because vengeance had ended. Justice had begun. As royal guards secured the chamber, Sir Alistair arrived carrying urgent news. The arrests have started. How many? 37. Judges. Members of Parliament. Military officers. Hawthorne was captured trying to leave Dover. Pembroke exhaled deeply. It's over. Sir Alistair slowly shook his head. Almost. He handed Theodore one final sealed document. The king requests your presence. 2 days later, Buckingham Palace. For the first time in generations, the Black Raven archive was presented before the crown. Every document, every confession, every ledger, every forged deed. The king listened for hours. When the final page was read,
He stood.
the room fell silent. His Majesty looked first at Theodore, then at Eleanor. Finally, he spoke. England owes you both a debt that cannot be measured. He turned toward Eleanor. Lady Eleanor Ashcombe, you were born the daughter of an honest man. You became the guardian of his legacy. He removed a small velvet case from the table. Inside rested the restored Black Raven medallion. No longer hidden, no longer feared. The king placed it gently into her hands. May the Black Raven never again belong to shadows, but to justice. Theodore looked at Eleanor. She looked back. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. The long war had finally ended, but their story had only just begun. The first snow of winter fell quietly over London, not as a warning, not as a funeral veil, but as something England had not known for many years.
Peace.
The newspapers no longer whispered of mysterious deaths. Parliament no longer trembled beneath invisible hands. The courts reopened hundreds of forgotten cases. Stolen estates were returned. Corrupt judges resigned. Military officers who had sold their honor stood trial before the very laws they had once manipulated. For the first time in a generation, justice moved faster than fear. At Raven's higher house, the smoke stains had finally disappeared. The West Wing had been rebuilt, stronger than before. The nursery windows overlooked new gardens planted by the children themselves. Every flower carried a small wooden marker. Each one bore the name of someone whose courage had saved the estate. Nathaniel Ashcombe, Lady Victoria Ashford, Edmund Ashford, Mrs. Sinclair, Samuel, even Lord Augustus Beaumont. When one little boy asked why Beaumont's name had been included, Eleanor knelt beside him. Because every choice teaches us something. The child frowned, but he was a bad man. He was, she answered gently. But if we remember only the good, we forget why goodness matters. Mrs. Sinclair smiled from the veranda. Lady Victoria would have approved. Months passed. Winter surrendered to spring. Letters arrived from every county in England. Some carried invitations. Others offered gratitude. Many simply contained the same sentence. Thank you for believing us when no one else did. Eleanor answered every letter herself. She remembered what it felt like to believe no one would listen. One bright April morning, Theodore found Eleanor standing beside the old oak tree where they had first spoken honestly. Children laughed nearby. Lucy chased Oliver across the lawn. James had grown tall enough to help Samuel in the stables. Life had continued, exactly as Lady Victoria had hoped. The Duke stood beside Eleanor. You've been avoiding me. She smiled without looking at him. I've been busy. You've reorganized an orphanage, established 3 schools, written 12 letters to Parliament, and somehow found time to teach fencing to 8-year-olds. She laughed softly. They cheat. They do. Silence settled comfortably between them, not awkward, peaceful, the kind earned after surviving storms together. Finally, Theodore reached into his coat pocket. He withdrew a small velvet box. Eleanor looked at it, then at him. You've carried that for 3 weeks. I know. You've nearly asked me something 7 different times. I know. She smiled. You're overthinking it. I know. He took a slow breath. For the first time since facing Adrian Ashford, the Duke of Ravensshire looked genuinely nervous. When we first met, I thought you were here to ruin my life. You nearly succeeded. She laughed. I remember. You reminded me that duty without kindness becomes pride. You reminded me that grief doesn't have to become loneliness. He opened the box. Inside rested Lady Victoria's sapphire, now set beside a simple diamond. My mother left me a title. My father left me a home. You, he looked into Eleanor's eyes, gave me a future. He knelt beneath the oak tree, not because custom demanded it, but because love humbled him. Lady Eleanor Ashcombe, will you become my wife? For a heartbeat, the world stood still. The children stopped playing. Mrs. Sinclair quietly covered her mouth. Samuel pretended to inspect the roses, while secretly wiping away tears. Pembroke smiled to himself. Everyone waited. Eleanor looked toward the house, toward the rebuilt nursery, toward the gardens, toward the 81 children who had become their family, then back at Theodore. She remembered the frightened Duke she had met months before, the lonely man hiding behind duty, the man who had climbed into a burning building without hesitation, the man who had chosen compassion over revenge. She smiled, not because she had finally found happiness, but because she had found someone determined to protect it beside her. Yes, she whispered, then, laughing through happy tears. Though I reserve the right to continue correcting you. Theodore laughed. I would expect nothing less. 6 months later, the cathedral overflowed. Not with politicians, not with powerful nobles, but with ordinary people. Teachers, servants, gardeners, widows, soldiers, orphans, families once ruined by the conspiracy. Every pew was filled, every aisle lined with white roses. Lucy scattered flower petals before Eleanor. James proudly carried the wedding rings. Oliver insisted on walking beside the Duke because, as he loudly announced, heroes shouldn't be lonely. The entire cathedral laughed. Even the Archbishop struggled to hide a smile. When Eleanor reached the altar, Theodore quietly whispered, "You look extraordinary." She whispered back, "You look terrified." "I am." "Good." As they exchanged vows, sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows. The colors painted the cathedral floor in crimson, gold, and sapphire blue, the very colors of the black raven crest. Mrs. Sinclair looked upward. For just a moment, she could almost imagine Lady Victoria smiling among the light. When the Archbishop pronounced them husband and wife, the cathedral erupted. Applause echoed beneath the vaulted ceiling. Children cheered. Church bells rang across the city. England welcomed its new Duchess of Ravensshire. Ravensshire House had changed forever. The estate no longer measured its success by wealth, but by lives transformed. The orphanage had become the Ravensshire Academy, where children from every background learned together. No titles, no privilege, only opportunity. Lucy dreamed of becoming a doctor. James planned to study law. Oliver declared he would become the tallest duke in England, despite possessing no noble blood whatsoever. No one corrected him. Dreams were welcome there. The Black Raven never returned as a secret society.
It no longer needed to.
Instead, its symbol appeared openly on schools, hospitals, and charitable foundations established across the country. Not as a mark of fear, but as a promise. Truth would never again be forced into the shadows. One evening, Theodore and Eleanor stood together beneath the same oak tree. The gardens glowed beneath the setting sun. Children's laughter floated across the fields. Eleanor rested her head against Theodore's shoulder. Do you ever wonder what Lady Victoria would think? Theodore smiled. I think she'd tell us we still have work to do. Eleanor laughed. Probably. He looked toward the academy, toward the children racing across the grass, toward a future built not on power, but on hope. Then he quietly answered, and I think she'd be proud. Far above them, a lone raven circled once over Ravensshire House. It settled upon the tallest oak, watched the family below, then spread its wings and disappeared into the golden evening sky. Its work, at last,
Was done.